The academy's top swordswoman charged at Ian, expecting to embarrass the same average student everyone ignored. Unfortunately for her, Ian looked bored. He dodged her blade by an inch, stepped inside her guard, and dropped the academy prodigy before the crowd could even process what happened. Syria hit the ground. Ian barely looked impressed. Apparently, defeating the strongest student was now part of his morning routine. The entire arena went silent as his cold pressure spread through the air, making even veteran students afraid to breathe. But 1 week ago, Ian was a complete nobody. Then he blacked out for 7 days and woke up with no memories, terrifying combat instincts, and a love letter from his future wife warning that the world would soon be destroyed. So who controlled his body during those missing 7 days? And how many academy monsters did future Ian already turn into practice targets? The jagged silhouette of the distant mountains fades into a sky stained with a deep, ominous crimson that suggests a long night of slaughter ahead. Below the peaks, the forest floor has been transformed into a literal graveyard of matted fur and viscera where Ian Purkis stands as the lone survivor. A heavy, sickening thud vibrates through the earth as the massive carcass of a beast finally settles into the mud. He looks completely untouchable despite the overwhelming carnage surrounding him. Fresh blood pools around Ian Purkis's boots, soaking into the parched grass as he stares down the remaining predators with chilling indifference. 2 massive shadow wolves creep forward from the tree lean, their eyes burning with a haunting, supernatural violet flame as they snarl at the man who just decimated their pack. They are towering, muscular beasts with jagged teeth meant for snapping human bone, yet they seem visibly hesitant to actually close the distance. Their guttural growls fill the air, desperate to find a single crack in Ian's ironclad posture. Ian Purkis doesn't give them a moment to find their courage, coolly asking which one of them is ready to be the next victim. His hand, encased in a white glove that is now drenched in a thick coat of dark red, tightens with a crushing grip around the hilt of his heavy blade. The polished metal of his sword glints sharply, catching the dying light and reflecting the cold, calculated determination etched into his face. He is perfectly still, treating this life-or-death struggle like nothing more than a routine training session at the academy. In a sudden, violent explosion of mana and steel, Ian Purkis swings his blade and carves a massive, glowing X across the entire battlefield. The purple energy slashes through the air with enough kinetic force to warp the atmosphere, catching the shadow wolves in a lethal crossfire of pure destruction. The impact sends a physical shockwave through the surrounding trees, throwing the beasts backward into the darkness as their forms are shredded by the blast. It is a terrifying display of raw, unfiltered power that proves he is in a league of his own. Ian Purkis stands with his back to the lingering destruction, his red academy cape billowing slightly as embers from the mana blast drift like fireflies through the air. Behind him, the shadows begin to churn and coalesce into a much larger, multi-headed nightmare that refuses to stay down. The creature reveals its multiple maws, letting out a series of overlapping, guttural roars that literally shake the ground beneath Ian's feet. This is the true alpha of the woods, and it is pouring every ounce of its malice into its next strike. Ian Purkis slowly shifts his head toward the sound of the snarling heads, a wild and predatory expression completely replacing his usual calm. His right gold eye ignites with an intense, supernatural light that seems to cut right through the beast's physical form. A sharp, menacing smirk spreads across his face as he realizes the real fight is just beginning. He is ready to see if this monster can actually provide the challenge he's been looking for. Thick drops of crimson splatter against the gray, weathered background as the intensity of the struggle reaches a sudden, bloody boiling point. Ian Purkis drives his strike home with lethal intent, the impact rattling the massive wolf's skull and forcing its jaws wide in a silent scream of pure agony. The spray of blood is almost artistic in its jagged violence, painting the scene of a boy who has clearly survived 1,000 battles before this one. He looks less like a simple academy student and more like a seasoned executioner in this flickering light. A brilliant explosion of white and purple light tears through the darkness, signaling a collision of pure, unadulterated magical power. Ian Purkis pivots on his heel with predatory grace, his blade becoming a blur of motion that leaves jagged white scars in the very air around his target. The beast's roar is cut short by the sheer speed of his assault, forcing the monster to scramble backward just to keep its physical form in one piece. He's moving so fast that the human eye can barely keep up with the absolute carnage unfolding on the forest floor. The wolf's cavernous mouth snaps shut just inches away from Ian Purkis, its glowing purple eyes reflecting the cold, unwavering determination etched into his features. He stands his ground against the towering wall of fur and fangs, his red academy uniform fluttering in the violent wind generated by the creature's massive, desperate movements. A single bead of sweat rolls down his temple as he shouts back at the beast, his voice cutting through the chaos with the weight of a true aristocrat. This isn't a moment of fear for him, it's a moment of absolute, focused bloodlust. Ian Purkis's right eye ignites with a terrifying golden flame, seeing right through the beast's frantic movements to find the one fatal flaw in its stance. He shifts his weight onto his back foot, the massive shadow of the monster looming over him like a mountain of dark energy ready to collapse at any second. He grips the hilt of his weapon with lethal precision, the metal beginning to hum as it absorbs the immense mana radiating from his tensed body. One wrong move here would mean being turned into literal dog food, but Ian doesn't plan on missing. With a roar that matches the beast's own ferocity, Ian Purkis unleashes a devastating upward swing that lights up the entire forest in shades of blinding red. The steel bites deep into the creature's chest, followed immediately by a deafening crack that sounds like a mountain splitting in two from the pressure. The force of the blow sends a massive shockwave through the dirt, vibrating up through Ian's boots as he shatters the creature's magical defenses like cheap glass. That hit definitely had some personal frustration behind it, and the beast is feeling every bit of it. The monster lets out a choked, desperate sound as it's thrown backward by the sheer, overwhelming momentum of Ian Purkis's relentless offensive. Blood and dark mist explode from the fresh wound, coating the grass in a foul-smelling sludge while the beast tries and fails to regain its balance on the uneven ground. Ian's grip on his weapon remains vice-like, his knuckles white as he prepares to transition his momentum into the final, killing strike. The hunt is reaching its climax, and Ian is the one holding the leash in this fight. A streak of jagged red energy slices through the darkness as Ian moves with blinding speed. He unleashes a flurry of strikes that leave trails of crimson light and black mist hanging in the air like tattered silk. The target is completely overwhelmed, shredded by a series of precise, high-speed slashes that offer no room for a counterattack. It's an absolute massacre of shadows and steel. Ian stands triumphant on a jagged cliffside, his silhouette framed by the dying light of a deep orange sunset. He leans heavily on his blade while the dark spirit beneath him dissolves into swirling purple smoke and hateful, glowing eyes. The entity spits out a final curse, calling Ian a son of a bitch as its physical form begins to unravel completely. Ian just stares back with total indifference, letting the monster's desperate insults wash over him. Blood splatters across Ian's face, catching the light as his golden eyes flare with a cold, predatory intensity. He tells the fading spirit that he no longer has any reason to let it exist in this world. With a single, brutal motion, Ian delivers a finishing blow that causes a massive explosion of blood to coat the ground in darkness. The fight is over, and the silence that follows is deafening. The screen washes out into a bright white void filled with elegant black and red text. This transition marks the official title card for the story, Love Letter from the Future, signaling a massive shift in the narrative's tone. The gritty, blood-soaked atmosphere of the battlefield suddenly gives way to something that feels much more like a traditional academy setting. We are leaving the darkness behind for a moment to see the man Ian has become. Ian shouts out with a wide, infectious grin, his face slightly flushed from excitement or exertion. He is formally introduced as a third-year student in the Department of Swordsmanship, looking vibrant and full of life compared to his earlier self. He's waving a hand and cheering loudly, clearly the center of attention in a very noisy crowd. It's hard to believe this is the same guy who was just executing shadows in the sunset. A girl with long black hair and sharp yellow eyes points a finger directly at Ian's face with a look of pure annoyance. Celine Haster, a second-year night trainee, is currently lecturing him about the very real possibility of being expelled. She warns him that even if he's a genius with a sword, failing his other exams will get him kicked out of the academy in a heartbeat. She's definitely the only person here trying to keep things professional. Leto Amstern leans heavily against Ian's shoulder, holding a dark bottle and laughing with a mischievous glint in his green eyes. He is a fellow swordsmanship student who clearly prioritizes a good celebration over following Celine's strict warnings. He jokes around with Ian, seemingly unbothered by the threat of academic failure as long as the mood remains this good. This guy is the definition of a bad influence who is way too much fun to hang out with. Ian Purkis sits on a bench with a flushed face, rhythmically patting his legs while rambling about his horse riding skills. His brown-haired peer sits right beside him, looking even more wasted with a glazed expression and a literal trail of drool escaping his mouth. The two of them stand up and start swaying back and forth in the middle of the courtyard, completely oblivious to how ridiculous they look. Celine stands a few feet away, watching this drunken disaster unfold with a look of pure, soul-crushing exhaustion. She mutters that her life expectancy drops every time she has to deal with their carefree nonsense during exam season. Celine finally loses her temper, leaning in to scream at the top of her lungs while Ian Purkis and his buddy just stand there looking confused. She is fuming because they are stating the obvious about being in the swordsmanship department while they can barely stand upright. The two trainees look like they've had their brains fried by the alcohol, barely processing the lecture. Celine points a sharp finger toward the dorms, reminding them that the first period tomorrow is a practical swordsmanship class. She warns them that being late means instant point deductions, which is basically academic suicide at this academy. The group finally splits up under the pale moonlight, waving goodbye with sloppy, uncoordinated gestures. Ian Purkis and his brown-haired peer offer a final, drunken, "see you tomorrow," before stumbling off in opposite directions. The academy buildings loom tall and silent behind them, a sharp contrast to their loud, messy exit. Ian eventually reaches his private quarters, stumbling through the doorway and letting out a long, heavy sigh of relief. The room is dim and quiet, finally offering him a sanctuary away from the chaos of the night and Celine's relentless yelling. Ian Purkis faceplants directly onto his bed, not even bothering to take off his boots or his academy uniform. He groans into the pillow, swearing a solemn oath to never drink like that ever again. His body is completely spent, and the weight of the day's training combined with the booze finally wins the battle. We see a tight close-up of his face as he drifts off, his cheeks still stained bright red from the alcohol. He looks peaceful for a split second, but the silence of the room feels heavy, as if the shadows are waiting for him to let his guard down. The dream world shifts violently into a landscape of deep crimson and jagged shadows under the ominous title of Delpharem. A massive crow with glowing, demonic red eyes perches on a gnarled branch, overlooking a wasteland littered with the remnants of a great war. Ian Purkis is suddenly sitting in the middle of this graveyard of swords, looking small and isolated against the oppressive red sky. The air in this vision is thick with the scent of old blood and stagnant magic. This isn't just a regular nightmare. It feels like a memory or a prophecy clawing its way to the surface of his mind. A mysterious figure draped in a tattered, blood-soaked cloak stands with their back to us, surrounded by a swirling mist of ash. The text, "Delpharem is coming," appears like a death sentence across the screen, signaling an impending catastrophe that Ian cannot escape. The vision zooms in on Ian's face, but he doesn't look like a clumsy student anymore. His gold eyes are wide and glowing with a strange, concentric circle pattern that pulses with raw power. Fresh blood is splattered across his cheek, and his expression is one of cold, focused intensity. The carefree drunk from the courtyard is officially gone, replaced by a warrior waking up to a brutal reality. Towering pillars of orange flame and thick, black smoke erupt behind Ian Purkis as he stands amidst the ruins of a burning world. He looks like a shadow against the light of the explosion, his military cape caught in a hot wind that smells of ash and death. A sharp, blood-red scream shatters the atmosphere, signaling a moment of pure, unadulterated agony. This isn't just a vision, it's a soul-crushing descent into a nightmare he can't escape. Ian Purkis jolts upright in his bed with a violent shudder, his fingers digging into the fabric of his shirt right over his pounding heart. He sits there in the silence of his room, his mind racing as he tries to make sense of the reason a myth like Delpharem showed up in his head. He mutters that the excessive drinking from the night before must have turned his brain into a mess of hallucinations. Even for a heavy drinker, that dream was on a whole other level of twisted. Sunlight glints off the brass casing of a clock and the fine sand of an hourglass sitting on Ian Purkis's study desk. His eyes drift toward the small calendar nearby, and his breath hitches when he sees that the date written on the top page is completely wrong. It doesn't align with the timeline he remembers, making him realize that time has moved forward significantly while he was unconscious. The realization that he's lost track of the days makes his stomach do a slow, heavy flip. A few stray envelopes are scattered across the desk, catching the soft glow of the morning. Ian Purkis reaches out and picks up one particular letter, noticing the weight of the high-quality parchment and the perfect red wax seal on the back. He stares at the seal for a long beat, his military training telling him to be cautious while his curiosity starts to peak. This letter definitely wasn't here when he passed out last night, meaning someone was inside his private quarters. Ian Purkis breaks the seal and starts reading the letter, his eyes darting across the lines of incredibly neat and artistic handwriting. He suspects that the person who wrote this message also took the liberty of flipping his calendar to the correct day while he was sleeping. The style of the script is unmistakably feminine, featuring the kind of elegant loops you'd expect from a high-ranking student or a noblewoman. He is essentially holding a paper trail to a secret visitor who knows exactly where he lives. The air around Ian Purkis seems to turn a shimmering pink as he entertains the wild idea that someone in the academy has feelings for him. He grips the edges of the paper with both hands, his shoulders tensing as he processes the sudden shift from a world-ending nightmare to a potential secret confession. For a guy who was just dreaming about fire and death, this is a massive tonal shift he wasn't prepared to handle. He stands there completely frozen, trying to process his new status as the target of someone's affection. A blushing child clutches a piece of paper against a backdrop of soft pink stars and gentle memories. Ian Purkis reflects on how he once viewed his own life as nothing more than a vain story from a fairy tale he read as a young boy. He stands alone in his room, staring down at a formal letter on his desk as the reality of having a fiancé finally starts to sink in. The weight of that single title changes everything about how he has to navigate his current social standing. Ian Purkis leans back at his wooden desk, surrounded by scattered envelopes and a small calendar marking the passing days. He stares at the paper in his hand with a neutral, almost bored expression while resting his chin on his palm. Suddenly, his brow furrows and he lets out a sharp, annoyed click of his tongue. He realizes the entire emotional buildup of the message was a lie and that he was completely duped by the sender. Ian Purkis holds the letter up to the light, examining the sloppy handwriting and the distinct lack of care put into the presentation. He thinks to himself that whoever wrote this didn't even bother to put any real effort into the deception. He notes that if Cephia was going to try a trick like this, she should have been significantly more thorough with her preparation. It's a pretty bold move to try and play games with someone who has already survived a literal nightmare. The text on the parchment screams in bold letters about protecting the future or watching the entire world perish. Ian Purkis scans the vague, overly dramatic warning and feels an immediate wave of disappointment hit him. The ending of the message is so cryptic and poorly structured that it completely kills the tension he was starting to feel. He is officially over the ominous prophecy vibe and treats the threat like total garbage. Ian Purkis grips the paper tightly, his knuckles whitening as he begins to crush the parchment into a tight, messy ball. He scoffs at the ridiculous idea of anyone actually writing him a genuine love letter in a place as cutthroat as this academy. With a quick, dismissive flick of his wrist, he tosses the wad of paper into a nearby metal wastebasket. It hits the bottom with a hollow thud, effectively ending that little mystery before it could even start. The grand, white spires of Arancourt Academy stretch high into a clear, bright blue sky filled with summer warmth. Sunlight reflects off the intricate stonework and the majestic blue-tiled roofs of the massive campus complex. It's a peaceful, high-fantasy scene that masks the intense training and toxic social politics happening within the walls. The calm atmosphere is definitely a mask for the chaos Ian Purkis is about to walk straight into. Ian Purkis walks through the paved courtyard, keeping his eyes fixed forward as groups of other students stop and watch him pass. Bitter whispers break out immediately, with his peers calling him the crazy one or checking to see if he's the guy from the recent violent rumors. They've heard stories about him beating down others with zero hesitation, and the atmosphere is thick with judgment and fear. He is essentially a walking social landmine in a very expensive uniform. Ian Purkis stares ahead, feeling the physical weight of dozens of hostile eyes tracking his every single movement through the square. The background blurs into a hazy mix of floating blue petals and sunlight, but the pressure of the crowd is impossible to ignore. He knows everyone is staring at his back, and the silence from the students is somehow louder than any actual conversation. This is the heavy price of making such a massive name for himself in a single afternoon. A heavy, jagged axe hangs from a leather strap at Ian Purkis's waist, the cold steel catching the light as he moves through the crowd. He looks down at the weapon and realizes he has no logical explanation for why he's even carrying it around on a normal day. It's a brutal, oversized tool of war that definitely doesn't help him blend in with the more refined and elegant students. He's walking around looking like a literal executioner in the middle of a prestigious academic garden. Ian's gold eyes dart around as a bead of sweat rolls down his face, the sound of gossiping students filling the air like a swarm of angry bees. He is standing right in the middle of the path, but his own teammates are intentionally staring at the clouds and making desperate small talk about the weather just to avoid making eye contact. It is the ultimate cold shoulder from the people who are actually supposed to have his back. They are acting like even looking at Ian for a second might get them cursed or dragged into another disaster. The brown-haired peer huddles close to his female teammate, both of them looking like they have recently survived a literal horror movie. He blurts out that he has absolutely no intention of being dragged off to any more strange places, his voice cracking with genuine fear. Ian just stands there with a confused expression, completely unaware of the psychological trauma he has apparently put them through over the last few days. His training partner looks back over his shoulder one last time, checking to see if the bold Ian is still lurking somewhere behind those golden eyes. Ian tries to take a step forward to clear the air, his voice low as he starts to tell them he really isn't in the mood for whatever drama they are stirring up. Before he can even finish his sentence, the brown-haired peer loses his mind and charges straight at him. He reaches out with both hands, his face twisted in a frantic mix of terror and sheer frustration. The guy is moving purely on instinct now, driven by a week's worth of pent-up stress that is finally boiling over in public. The brown-haired student grabs Ian by the collar and starts shaking him violently, shouting at the top of his lungs that something weird possessed him for the past 7 days. Ian's jaw practically hits the floor because, in his own mind, he only said goodbye to these guys yesterday evening. A whole week has been completely wiped from his calendar, leaving a terrifying void where his memories of the academy should be. It is becoming painfully clear that something else has been driving Ian's body while he was totally asleep at the wheel. The view from above shows the group in the middle of the courtyard, where his friends are busy screaming about how their social reputations are now completely ruined. Apparently, Ian spent the entire missing week treating his closest allies like lowly servants and making a massive scene everywhere they went. The real kicker comes when they mention they would have called a professional exorcist days ago if Ian hadn't threatened their lives with a massive axe. He has gone from a promising student to the academy's local madman in record time. Ian stares down at the gleaming, oversized axe in his grip, the polished metal catching the sunlight as the weight of his actions finally settles in his gut. The weapon he has been carrying around wasn't just for show or training, it was the tool he used to keep his friends in a state of constant, shivering fear. His peers stand before him, fuming with anger and relief, as the reality of the evil spirit possession becomes completely undeniable. He has to figure out exactly what this entity did while it was wearing his face before the academy decides he is far too dangerous to keep around. Ian Purkis stands enveloped in a shimmering, ethereal blue light while ancient, glowing magic circles rotate slowly behind his dark silhouette in the silent training hall. He tries to piece together how his physical body became a vessel for a literal demon, but his memory of any cursed items or forbidden zones remains a total blank. The terrifying nightmare he had earlier seems like the only lead, but the sheer relief of the spirit finally being gone outweighs the mystery for now. Speech bubbles float against a clear, blue sky as Ian Purkis's peers discuss the string of violent incidents he caused while he was completely blacked out for days. He is genuinely clueless about his own recent history, yet the nervous energy and fear coming from the group tell him he did more than just break a few academy rules. Then the bombshell drops. Apparently, he didn't just cause a scene, he absolutely demolished the top student of the entire second-year class in a public duel. The dark silhouette of a legendary warrior stands with a massive, ornate sword planted firmly in the ground, framed against the imposing stone architecture of the Arancourt Academy. This is the Monster Swordswoman, a title reserved for only the most terrifyingly gifted students in the Academy's elite hierarchy of combatants. Ian Purkis looks completely stunned as the realization hits him that his body was moved by an entity capable of such lethal, high-level precision while he was unconscious. The name Syria Yerdina appears in glowing, aggressive blue text as Ian Purkis stares into the void with a look of pure, unadulterated disbelief and horror. He desperately hopes his friends are pulling an elaborate prank because defeating a monster like her sounds like a total fairy tale to a trainee of his standing. The reality is much more brutal, as his peer reminds him that Syria Yerdina was actually hospitalized for an entire week because of his direct actions during the possession. A small speech bubble floats over a background of shimmering light as Ian Purkis contemplates the massive social disaster he is currently walking into. A close-up of his red and black academy uniform follows as his friend reminds him that the swordsmanship class is starting right now. He realizes he has to go out there and pretend to be a legendary fighter when his actual skill set is still recovering from the spirit's departure. The blinding sun beats down on Ian Purkis as he looks up at the academy towers with cold sweat dripping down his temple from the sheer psychological stress. His golden eyes are wide and frantic as he realizes he has to walk into a training hall filled with people expecting a god-tier master combatant. An explosive, jagged speech bubble fills the frame as his inner voice screams in absolute terror at the impossible, life-threatening situation he is now facing. A pristine, elegant letter addressed to Ian Purkis lies open, its script reflecting a deep admiration from someone back in the capital city of Arancourt. The writer details a version of Ian that seems like a total stranger, describing him as a mature gentleman who wore stylish clothes and carried himself with an effortless, calm demeanor. They vividly remember his smile being as warm as the spring sunshine, a far cry from the cold, battle-hardened warrior he has become. It's a haunting reminder that while Ian is thriving in this brutal academy, he has completely left his old life behind. A close-up reveals a hand encased in a dark tactical glove, gripping a sword hilt with newfound tension as the reality of the situation sinks in. An internal monologue echoes through the training hall, admitting that in the past, Ian Purkis couldn't even survive 10 seconds in a duel against a real opponent. The shock is palpable because the person standing in the arena right now isn't just surviving, he's dominating the flow of the entire fight. Watching a former failure suddenly move like a god-tier master is enough to make anyone's head spin. Ian Purkis stands tall in his red and black military uniform, his golden eyes glowing with a sharp, predatory intensity that freezes his opponent in place. He spits out a cold insult, telling his challenger that their swordsmanship is mediocre at best, which is basically the ultimate slap in the face for an academy elite. Immediately after, he parries a massive strike from a white-haired girl named Syria, creating a violent explosion of white sparks that illuminates the entire hall. He is effectively dismantling her confidence and her technique at the exact same time. Ian's boot slides across the stone floor with a sharp, grating sound as he expertly adjusts his weight to find the perfect angle for a counter. He moves with a level of physical grace that shouldn't be possible for someone his age, showing no signs of the aristocratic gentleman mentioned in the letter. From a rear-view perspective, his red cape billows out like a shadow as he prepares to deliver a finishing blow to his stunned opponent. He isn't just playing defense anymore, he is hunting for the kill. Ian Purkis spins with blinding speed and launches a high-velocity roundhouse kick that slams directly into Syria's guard with the force of a falling mountain. The impact is so heavy that the white-haired girl is nearly sent flying across the training grounds while the air around them crackles with the sheer force of the blow. The brown-haired peer watches from the sidelines with his mouth hanging open, unable to believe that the girl who was undefeated against fourth years just got outclassed. Ian sticks the landing with a heavy thud, leaving the entire academy in a state of absolute, terrified silence. Ian Purkis stands tall in the center of the training grounds, his red military cape fluttering slightly as he looks down at his opponent with a cold, piercing gaze. He openly mocks the situation, explaining that the small opening he showed her was actually a calculated lure. Syria Yerdina walked straight into the trap without even realizing she was being manipulated the entire time. It turns out Ian Purkis isn't just relying on raw power, he's playing a psychological game that his peers aren't even close to understanding. Ian Purkis stares down at the ground for a moment, his internal monologue screaming about how much he hates his terrible luck. He catches a glimpse of Syria Yerdina's freezing blue eyes, which are wide and glowing with a terrifyingly focused intensity. She isn't looking at him like a fellow student anymore, but like a problem that needs to be solved with extreme prejudice. The air around the duo feels heavy and suffocating as the realization of their power gap sets in for the rest of the class. Syria Yerdina remains perfectly still, her long silver hair framing a face that has gone completely expressionless and cold. A voice from the sidelines shouts out Ian's name, telling him to just call it quits and walk away while he still looks like the winner. It is a desperate plea because everyone can feel the killing intent radiating off the silver-haired girl. Ian Purkis is stuck in a position where retreating might be just as dangerous as continuing the fight. The surrounding students start whispering amongst themselves, laughing about how Syria Yerdina is being way too persistent after a miserable loss. They talk about how her pride must be absolutely bruised, claiming that any normal person would have felt too ashamed to keep standing. Syria Yerdina keeps her head bowed low, her face hidden in the shadows of her hair as the mockery of her peers echoes through the stadium. She's being pushed into a mental corner where the only way out is through a total explosion of violence. Ian Purkis and Syria Yerdina face each other across a massive stretch of cracked stone, the tension between them reaching a literal breaking point. The academy instructor stands on the stairs and reminds them that this match serves as a formal grade substitute for their entire class. This means the outcome will determine their standing and future within Arancourt, making a peaceful resolution completely impossible. Both fighters tighten their grips on their weapons, knowing that their entire reputation is riding on the next 10 seconds. Ian Purkis lets out a jagged breath, silently cursing the evil spirit for leaving his body and leaving him to deal with this massive mess. He looks genuinely stressed as he stares at the silver-haired girl who is clearly ready for round 2. Even though he's terrified of the situation, he refuses to back down or show any weakness to the crowd. The stage is now set for an absolute bloodbath that will force Ian Purkis to prove he's more than just a host for a ghost. Ian Purkis stands perfectly still while a terrifying blue pressure begins to fill the arena. He realizes that Syria Yerdina is the undisputed top student who can easily afford to lose a few points on a test. For him, the situation is a total nightmare because failing this class means he'll end up as a failure living in his parents' basement. He resolves to hold his ground for just 10 minutes to satisfy the requirements of the duel. It's a desperate survival strategy, but he is genuinely fighting for his entire future here. A gloved hand clenches tightly around a sword hilt as the tension in the room reaches a breaking point. Syria Yerdina suddenly vanishes, her silver hair becoming a blur as she launches herself forward with lethal intent. She unleashes a series of high-speed strikes that look like glowing white ribbons cutting through the air. Ian Purkis watches the flurry in slow motion, his eyes straining to keep up with a level of swordsmanship that shouldn't be possible for a student. This isn't just a simple sparring match, it's a sheer display of overwhelming dominance. A massive impact sends a shockwave rippling across the floorboards as Ian Purkis takes the brunt of the assault. He lets out a strained cry, his face contorted with the effort of not being blown away by her sheer mana. He knows that if he backs down now, a proud warrior like Syria Yerdina would despise him for the rest of her life. He pulls himself together and decides that the time for running is officially over. He stares her down and declares that it is finally his turn to go on the offensive. Ian Purkis lunges across the gap, his red and black academy uniform snapping in the wind of his own speed. As he moves, a strange sensation washes over him because his body feels impossibly light and agile. The heavy, awkward movements he used to struggle with are gone, replaced by a terrifyingly efficient physical grace. It's as if his muscles are being piloted by a master who knows exactly how to maximize every single step. He is closing the distance with a level of predatory precision that would shock any witness. The wooden training sword carves a sharp, glowing arc through the air as Ian Purkis swings with everything he has. He is still haunted by the gap in his memory from his recent blackout, but his body doesn't seem to care about the confusion. Every muscle fiber is firing in perfect sync, executing a high-level technique that he has never even practiced before. He notes with a sense of grim satisfaction that his body is moving exactly where he wants it to go. The hunter has officially become the hunted in this high-stakes classroom duel. Syria's eyes ignite with a piercing blue glow as a massive torrent of mana floods her entire system. She channels her energy into a singular point, causing the air around her to ripple with raw power. This transformation is terrifying, signaling that the top student is no longer holding back. Syria launches forward with blinding speed, her training sword becoming a blur of white light. Ian is forced to scramble backward in a visible panic, his eyes wide as he realizes the sheer intensity of this assault. The gap between them vanishes in an instant, leaving him with no choice but to retreat. A shimmering arc of white energy carves through the air as Syria delivers a ferocious, overhead strike. The force of the swing is so immense that it leaves a trail of glowing particles behind the blade's path. Ian barely manages to raise his weapon in time, but the pressure is overwhelming. The sheer force of the exchange ends with Ian pinned against the cold stone floor, his head bowed low in submission. Syria stands tall and looks down at her opponent with a cold gaze that screams martial superiority. This is the exact scene the entire academy expected to see from the start. Ian stares at the grit on the ground, vividly remembering how effortlessly Syria toyed with him just 1 week ago. He realizes that everyone watching sees him as nothing more than a temporary distraction for the real prodigy. The weight of his past reputation as a failure feels heavier than his sword. A faint, reddish heat begins to radiate from Ian's hair as his boiling internal frustration reaches a violent breaking point. He decides in this moment that he simply cannot stand hearing another word about his past failures. His focus shifts, and a new, desperate kind of adrenaline begins to surge through him. Syria clenches her teeth in absolute fury, visibly disgusted that her pristine reputation as a monster has taken a hit. She is clearly livid that a former failure like Ian could even stand on the same stage for this long. She is ready to end this charade right now. Syria lets out a guttural, earth-shaking roar as her long silver hair stands on end and her aura explodes. The sheer pressure of her mana is enough to make the surrounding air feel heavy and suffocating for the crowd. She has officially tapped into her deepest reserves to finish this fight. A sharp, crimson glint catches Ian's eye as he tracks the trajectory of Syria's incoming blade with superhuman precision. He notes with a strange sense of calm that his kinetic vision is evolving right in the middle of this exchange. The world seems to slow down as he identifies the perfect opening. Ian spins his heavy training sword in a fluid circle, meeting Syria's desperate strike with flawless timing and a steady hand. He confirms that his reaction speed has improved to a level that shouldn't even be possible for his rank. His body is moving with a grace that contradicts his old reputation. The two blades collide with a deafening boom, sending jagged shards of light and stone debris flying across the arena. The impact creates a massive shockwave that rattles the windows and leaves the audience gasping in pure disbelief. Neither combatant is willing to give an inch in this final, desperate clash. Ian digs his heels deep into the cracked floor, absorbing the massive impact and redirecting that energy into a crushing counter-slam. The ground shatters into dust beneath the weight of the blow as bright sparks shower the combatants. This is no longer a simple duel, it's a fight for survival. Syria Yerdina blurs into a streak of silver light, attempting to flank Ian Purkis from the left before instantly dropping her center of gravity to the floor. She pivots from that low angle to launch a blistering frontal thrust that aims straight for his heart, forcing Ian Purkis into a desperate parry. Her speed is reaching a point where her movements are becoming a jagged, lethal blur. Ian Purkis catches the brunt of her heavy blade, sending a violent, blinding spray of sparks across the shattered stone floor. He recognizes that this isn't just a series of random strikes, but a single, unbroken chain of aggression designed to systematically break his defensive stance. He is barely keeping his head above water as the sheer volume of her attacks threatens to drown him. Ian Purkis observes the frantic flurry of cold steel and notices a glaring, strange inefficiency in Syria Yerdina's current fighting form. He finds it odd that she is wasting so much precious energy on these elaborate and completely unnecessary flourishes. It's a bizarre contradiction to the clinical and efficient killing machine he expects her to be. Ian Purkis stands his ground while reflecting on the fundamental rules of engagement that he had actually shared with others in the past. He remembers the specific warning to never dive headfirst into a visible opening because it's almost certainly a calculated trap. It's incredibly ironic considering he is the one who preached this very lesson to his peers just 1 week ago. Heavy beads of sweat roll down Ian Purkis's face as his breathing becomes increasingly heavy, ragged, and labored. His chest heaves violently with every desperate gasp for air, showing the massive physical toll this high-speed exchange is taking on his stamina. He looks like a man who is currently running on nothing but pure fumes and stubborn willpower. A mocking, internal voice cuts through the thick tension, pointing out exactly how awful and pathetic Ian Purkis looks in his current state. The sharp demand for him to finally stop holding back and actually get serious rings out across the quiet battlefield. The stakes of this duel are shifting from a simple test of skill into a much more grim reality. Ian Purkis's golden eyes narrow into sharp, predatory slits as he begins to fully process the complex flow of the battle. He acknowledges that while his own physical strength has reached a frightening new peak, he isn't the only person on this field who has evolved. The very atmosphere around him starts to feel heavier as he prepares to completely shift his combat strategy. A close-up of the shimmering, lethal blade reveals the cold intent behind every single one of Syria Yerdina's swings. She has clearly shed her previous academic limitations and is now fighting with a level of raw intensity that dwarfs their previous encounters. She is no longer just a talented student, she has become a genuine force of nature. Syria Yerdina lunges forward with her dark cloak fluttering behind her like the tattered shadow of a bird of prey. She brings her heavy weapon down in a massive, sweeping arc that aims to split Ian Purkis in two with one clean motion. The sheer kinetic force behind the swing creates a visible distortion in the air as she commits everything to this blow. The two blades finally collide with a deafening, metallic roar that sends a massive shockwave of blue and white light through the entire courtyard. Ian Purkis braces his entire body against the crushing impact, digging his feet into the stone to avoid being pushed back by the weight of her resolve. This is a total, violent collision between two monsters who have completely abandoned the idea of losing. Syria Yerdina lunges forward with her blade, but Ian Purkis meets the strike with a heavy, two-handed block that sends sparks flying between their weapons. The shockwave of the impact ripples through their academy uniforms, forcing both fighters to strain every muscle just to keep their footing on the trembling stone. Ian's golden eyes are locked onto hers as he absorbs the full momentum of her desperate assault without flinching. It's honestly hard to believe this is the same guy who was supposedly a total failure just a few days ago. Ian Purkis shifts his weight, his boots grinding into the cracked pavement as he realizes this is the perfect moment to execute his secret plan. He thinks to himself that if he calls it quits right now, Syria Yerdina won't be able to say a single word against the results of their duel. His face is a mask of cold determination, sweat dripping down his cheek as he prepares to finish this social suicide mission once and for all. He isn't just fighting for a win, he's fighting to make sure she never forgets this humiliation. Syria Yerdina's silver hair flares out as her mana explodes in a brilliant blue aura, her eyes glowing with a terrifying intensity as she prepares her final move. She screams that it is finally time for her to show Ian Purkis exactly what she can do, refusing to let the fight end on anyone's terms but her own. Ian stands alone in the center of the arena, his red cape billowing in the wind as he watches her move with a strangely detached expression. He looks like a man who has already seen the end of this story and is just waiting for the world to catch up. The scene explodes into chaos as Ian Purkis is struck by a massive blast of force that sends him flying backward through the air. A sharp, violent sound effect indicates the sheer power of the blow as it connects with his chest, tearing through the silence of the academy grounds. He doesn't even attempt to dodge or parry, allowing the momentum to carry him across the arena like a ragdoll. It's a brutal, bone-jarring impact that leaves a trail of dust in its wake. The grand spires of Arancourt Academy loom over the fallen fighter as the official announcement rings out, giving Ian Purkis only 5 seconds to return to his feet. The referee's voice bellows, "1," across the courtyard, signaling the beginning of what could be the end of Ian's streak. Ian's eyes are partially closed as he reflects on the unbelievable events that have transformed his life over the past few hours. The tension is reaching a literal breaking point as every student in the crowd leans forward to see if he'll actually move. Ian Purkis remains motionless on the ground, his face partially hidden as the count of 2 echoes through the heavy, expectant silence of the arena. Syria Yerdina stands over him, her breathing ragged and her blue eyes wide with a sudden, dawning sense of total disbelief. She realizes in this moment that Ian took that massive hit on purpose, manipulating the entire flow of the duel to ensure he lost the physical fight while winning the psychological war. He's essentially broken her spirit without ever needing to land a final blow. Ian Purkis's bloodied hand twitches against the cold, grit-covered stone of the arena floor while he counts down the final seconds of his own recovery. He rasps out a warning to his opponent, claiming he'll just request another duel immediately if Syria Yerdina tries to end things while he's still conscious. Syria Yerdina stands paralyzed in her tracks, her silver hair shimmering under the stadium lights as she stares at the boy who should have been defeated minutes ago. Ian Purkis ignores the searing pain in his limbs and forces his fingers to curl into a white-knuckled fist, physically anchoring himself to the reality of the fight. It's wild how he's basically using pure spite as a secondary mana source at this point. Ian Purkis pushes himself up to one knee with agonizing slowness, his golden eyes glowing with a predatory intensity that seems to pierce through Syria Yerdina's composure. Syria Yerdina grips the hilt of her sword until her knuckles turn white, her blue eyes reflecting a dawning realization that her easy victory has completely evaporated. The scarred instructor watches the scene from the sidelines with his arms crossed over his chest, his stern expression hiding a deep sense of intrigue at this sudden turn of events. The instructor bellows for the duel to continue, officially authorizing a final round that neither of these students was truly prepared for. The crowd is probably holding their breath because the vibe just shifted from a school match to a literal death struggle. The instructor's sharp command to get ready rings through the silent arena, and Ian Purkis acknowledges the order with a cold, terrifyingly focused nod. Syria Yerdina tries to find her center, but the sheer, oppressive weight of the mana radiating from Ian Purkis makes it feel like the very air is turning into lead. Ian Purkis realizes that he has pushed himself too far to ever return to his quiet life as a failure, so he fully commits to the path of the monster. He stares directly into Syria Yerdina's trembling eyes and promises to tear her precious, high-born pride into tiny, unrecognizable shreds. This isn't just a physical battle anymore, he is actively trying to break her spirit on a fundamental level. A massive, blinding shockwave of pure mana erupts from the center of the arena floor, momentarily turning the entire world into a void of white light and thunderous noise. Syria Yerdina lashes out with a high-speed strike, her blade cutting through the air with the desperate strength of someone who knows her social status is on the line. Ian Purkis stands firm against the incoming assault, his red academy cape billowing behind him like a blood-soaked wing as he prepares to counter. He stares up at her from a braced position, looking like a demonic force that has finally been unleashed after years of being suppressed. The stage is officially set for a finish that is going to haunt the memories of every student watching for the rest of the semester. A violent spark of kinetic energy explodes outward as the two training swords lock in a desperate struggle for dominance. Syria Yerdina can only stare down at the floor as dark droplets of blood begin to splash against the cold paving stones of the courtyard. Ian Purkis grinds his teeth and holds his position, his hands steady despite the massive impact of their previous clash. The sheer impossibility of the situation is starting to sink in for everyone watching as the failure stands his ground against the Academy's best. Heavy, jagged shadows streak across the frame as Ian Purkis moves with a predatory fluidity that defies his previous reputation. He catches her off guard and lets out a low, menacing claim that he has finally caught her in his trap. Syria Yerdina looks up at him with a face drained of all color, her blue eyes reflecting a sudden and primal fear. Ian Purkis realizes he can't retreat even if he wanted to, so he leans entirely into the chaos of the fight to see it through to the end. Syria Yerdina stands paralyzed for a fleeting second, her silver hair fluttering in the wind as she processes the massive shift in power. Ian Purkis looks right through her, his internal resolve hardening as he decides to systematically dismantle her remaining pride once and for all. He notes with cold clarity that her once invisible sword movements are now appearing in slow motion before his sharp gold eyes. It is an absolute nightmare scenario for the girl who was once feared by everyone as the monster swordswoman. Ian Purkis adjusts his stance and narrows his gaze, focusing every bit of his spiritual energy into the wooden weapon in his hand. He challenges her to come at him with everything she's got, refusing to let her have even a moment of breathing room to recover. The red and black of his errand court uniform looks sharp against the bright sky as he prepares his body for the final exchange of the duel. He is mentally committed to the total destruction of her ego, and the tension in the air is thick enough to choke on. Syria Yerdina charges forward with a burst of speed that leaves a trail of dust and fractured stone in her wake. She unleashes a massive, shimmering wave of mana that cuts through the air like a literal razor made of pure light. Ian Purkis doesn't even flinch as the blue energy engulfs his vision, his body moving on pure instinct as he tracks the blade's path. He knows exactly where the strike is landing and he is already positioning his sword to deliver the decisive blow that will end this fight. Glimmering blue streaks of mana paint a complex map across the vision of Ian Purkis as he zeroes in on his final target. He focuses his mind entirely on the path of Syria Yerdina's sword, tracing the energy before her physical blade can even complete its desperate arc. Syria Yerdina lunges forward in a blinding blur of silver hair and glowing blue eyes, putting every single ounce of her remaining strength into this one final strike. A massive jagged line of white light shears through the arena as Syria Yerdina commits to a devastating, high-velocity overhead swing meant to end the duel. Ian Purkis stays perfectly calm, his sharp gold eyes narrowing as he measures the exact timing of her swings with a mechanical, cold precision. He doesn't flinch or move a muscle until the very last possible millisecond, showcasing a level of battlefield composure that is honestly borderline terrifying. Ian Purkis stands firmly at the center of a swirling vortex of mana, his red academy cape whipping violently behind him as the pressure of the fight peaks. He raises his practice blade and meets her strike head-on, the sudden impact creating a massive shockwave that ripples across the stone training grounds. The blue energy of her assault dissipates against his defense like smoke in a hurricane, proving that her legendary status means nothing in this moment. A heavy, metallic thud echoes through the silent frame as the force of Ian Purkis's counteroffensive sends a jarring vibration through Syria Yerdina's entire body. Syria Yerdina lets out a sharp, choked gasp, her mouth hanging open in pure, unadulterated disbelief as her momentum is violently snuffed out by a superior force. Ian Purkis has closed the distance instantly, his hand steady on his hilt as he stares her down from inches away with a look of absolute dominance. Ian Purkis's glowing gold eyes pierce through the gloom of the arena, looking more like a predatory monster than a regular student at Arancourt Academy. Syria Yerdina collapses onto the cold stone floor, her knees hitting the tiles as the crushing weight of her defeat and Ian's aura finally breaks her spirit. This wide shot of him standing tall over her trembling form cements his new status as the most dangerous person on campus, and the look of trauma on her face says it all. Syria Yerdina's practice sword flies through the air, spinning in a slow-motion circle before clattering uselessly into the dirt far out of her reach. Ian Purkis stands victorious and lets out a ferocious, guttural roar that signals the official end of the duel and the total destruction of the old hierarchy. He looks absolutely unhinged with his teeth bared and his eyes burning gold, marking the exact moment that Arancourt Academy realizes they have a new monster in their midst. Syria Yerdina is hunched over on the dusty arena floor, her fingers dug deep into her silver hair as she shakes with pure, unadulterated terror. Ian Purkis stands just inches away from her, looking down with a face matted with sweat and gold eyes that still hold a sharp, predatory gleam. He's looking at her not as a rival to be finished off, but as a complex problem that needs a very specific and unconventional kind of solution. The silence between them feels heavier and more suffocating than the actual physical battle they just endured. The wide shot reveals the massive shift in power as Ian Purkis looms over the kneeling girl like a giant standing over a fallen monument. He speaks with a low, steady voice, stating that simply winning this duel won't actually solve the toxic cycle of their academy environment. He looks surprisingly calm for a student who just committed social suicide by systematically dismantling the school's most beloved prodigy in front of everyone. The guy is clearly playing 4D chess while the rest of the student body is just trying to remember how to breathe. Ian Purkis reaches out a steady hand toward her defenseless face, causing the nearby spectators to gasp in expectation of a final, brutal finishing blow. Instead of a strike, he winds up and delivers a sharp, stinging flick directly to the center of Syria Yerdina's forehead. She lets out a startled, high-pitched cry of pain and recoils, the sheer absurdity of the gesture instantly breaking the heavy, life-and-death tension of the moment. It's a total power move that treats the legendary, monster swordswoman like a bratty little sister instead of a lethal threat. Syria Yerdina snaps her head up with her eyes wide and her face burning a bright, humiliated shade of crimson. She demands to know if Ian Purkis is intentionally mocking her now that he's officially taken her rank and ruined her perfect reputation. She is gritting her teeth so hard you can practically hear the enamel grinding together as she tries to process the ultimate disrespect of that forehead flick. The transition from a terrifying, cold warrior to a deeply insulted and confused teenager is honestly a wild sight to behold. Ian Purkis offers a small, knowing smile and asks her why she even bothers placing so much value on what these nameless, talentless spectators think of her. This question hits her harder than any physical mana burst, forcing her to confront the fact that her entire identity was built on the hollow gaze of the masses. Syria Yerdina can only stare at the ground in a daze, the long shadows of the academy walls closing in as she realizes her world has been permanently altered. This isn't just a simple defeat in a duel, it's a total psychological reset that leaves her completely speechless. Ian speaks with a sharp edge, telling Syria Yerdina that the pain of seeing her hard work seemingly vanish is a necessary burden for her growth. Syria stares back with a hollow look, finally admitting to herself that she has spent her entire time at the academy feeling like she was constantly losing. It's a heavy, quiet moment where the perceived failure is the one handing out cold reality to the school's top genius. She realizes that her identity was tied to a winning streak that Ian Purkis just shattered. Ian stands tall in his red and black uniform, bluntly stating that there is no point in taking the selfish, judgmental words of the crowd to heart. Syria Yerdina looks toward the towering, blue-roofed spires of the academy and acknowledges that Ian is absolutely right about her mental state. She had unconsciously poisoned her own progress by convincing herself her sword was useless just because it didn't meet the expectations of others. The weight of everyone else's opinions had been a shackle she didn't even know she was wearing until this very moment. Syria Yerdina closes her eyes and lets out a soft, relieved breath, her face finally losing that tense mask of perfection as she admits she's learned a massive lesson. She steps forward and drops into a deep, formal bow, offering Ian Purkis a sincere and public word of thanks for the match. Seeing the Academy's most feared swordswoman humble herself before a supposed lunatic is a total system shock for every student in the vicinity. This isn't just a concession, it's a complete submission to the superior philosophy Ian displayed during their clash. The crowd of onlookers is absolutely reeling, their voices overlapping in a frantic blur of whispers about how Ian Purkis just dominated the top student twice in a row. The shock on their faces is palpable as they try to process the fact that the hierarchy of Arancourt Academy has been flipped upside down in a single afternoon. Even the instructor can't help but let out a boisterous laugh, clearly amused by the massive upset as he officially announces Ian as the winner. The official declaration makes the reality of the situation sink in for the rest of the stunned student body. Ian Purkis begins walking away from the arena with his hands at his sides, the sunlight filtering through the Grand Academy arches as he leaves the spectacle behind. He makes a silent vow to walk his own path from here on out, completely indifferent to the fear or confusion his actions have caused the masses. Syria Yerdina stands still and watches his retreating back with a newfound sense of clarity and purpose. She is now determined to forge her own way forward, exactly the way Senior Ian has just taught her through his brutal honesty. Ian Purkis glances back over his shoulder for a brief second, his golden eyes glowing with a calm but unmistakably dangerous intensity that warns anyone against following him. The era of him being the Academy's punching bag is officially dead and buried beneath the dirt of this training ground. With the dust finally settling on this duel, the power balance at the Academy has shifted permanently toward the unknown. The grand clock tower of Arancourt Academy looms over a campus that is absolutely vibrating with the latest school scandal. Ian Purkis walks through the crowded plaza while sweating profusely as 100 pairs of eyes bore into his back. The surrounding students are literally huddling together in fear, whispering that everyone should stay as far away from this new monster as possible. It is a total 180 from his life as the school's local failure, and the sheer dread in the air is palpable. A hand reaches out toward Ian Purkis, but he is too deep in his own head to notice the changing social tide. He stares down at his trembling palms, haunted by the fact that his victory over Syria Yerdina was fueled by something other than his own strength. A haunting vision of a glowing, spectral blue hand manipulating mana flashes through his mind, confirming that a separate entity was in control. He realizes he moved with a cold, supernatural efficiency that predicted every single mistake before his opponent even made them. Ian Purkis stands frozen in the middle of the path, looking completely broken as he tries to piece together his missing week of memories. A finger pokes him sharply in the shoulder to break his trance, and he looks up to find Celine Haster standing there. She greets him with a bright, welcoming smile while flanked by a fellow student who seems genuinely excited to be in his presence. The school's social hierarchy has been flipped upside down, and Ian is now the unintentional king of the hill. Ian Purkis turns his head away with a dark, stressed expression while trying to explain the terrifying reality of his possession. Celine Haster dismisses his worries immediately, telling him that the rumors spreading through the dorms are actually great for his image. She makes it clear that people don't care if he's a bit of a psycho as long as he remains this powerful. The crazy part is that being a feared lunatic is apparently a massive upgrade from being the Academy's favorite punching bag. Celine Haster laughs while explaining that his status as a low-ranking country noble used to be a massive target on his back. She mentions that everyone used to mock his lineage while secretly admitting that he was actually incredibly attractive. It turns out his good looks were the only thing keeping his reputation afloat before he decided to go on a combat rampage. Ian Purkis listens to this with a look of pure disbelief as his entire identity is redefined by his peers in real time. Celine Haster beams with pride as she explains that even the most arrogant high-ranking nobles have finally stopped their bullying. They are all too terrified of becoming Ian's next victim to even look in their general direction. Ian Purkis finally snaps, lunging forward to grab Celine Haster's arm in a wide-eyed, desperate state of total panic. He has finally realized that he accidentally declared war on the school's status quo, and the upcoming consequences are going to be absolute mayhem. Ian Purkis stands in the center of the Academy courtyard, his hands shifting restlessly as he feels the weight of the local gossip mill. Every student nearby is whispering about his recent exploits, and the rumors are spreading faster than a wildfire through the ranks. His red-haired peer leans in, speaking through gritted teeth as she tells him to glance to the side without being obvious about it. There is a very specific, very familiar shadow watching him from the edge of the tree lean. A mass of silver hair pokes out from behind a thick tree trunk, completely ruining any chance of a stealthy approach in the bright daylight. Syria Yerdina is huddled there, peeking out with a wide-eyed, intense stare while wearing a ridiculous black domino mask over her eyes. She seems to believe that as long as her brow is partially covered, her entire identity is magically shielded from the rest of the world. It's an absurdly low-effort disguise for someone who used to be the Academy's most feared talent. Ian Purkis looks on with a face full of second-hand exhaustion while his teammates basically lose their minds in the background. They are shouting and gesturing wildly, unable to comprehend why their former nemesis has turned into a bumbling, amateur stalker. This has been the status quo for 5 full days, with Syria Yerdina tailing him like a persistent, clumsy ghost. The girl who once tried to crush his skull is now apparently unable to function without being in his general vicinity. Syria Yerdina remains glued to the bark of the tree, her internal panic reaching a fever pitch as she tries to find the courage to actually step forward. Ian Purkis decides to end the charade once and for all and walks directly up to her hiding spot, calling her name with zero hesitation. She nearly leaps out of her boots in fright, her hands flying to her face as she processes the impossible realization that she's been spotted. She is actually offended that her mask didn't work, acting like Ian Purkis has used some kind of forbidden cheat code to recognize her. The comedic tension snaps, replaced by a sudden and heavy silence as Syria Yerdina finally stops acting like a nervous, eccentric child. She stands tall, her silver hair catching the light and her eyes shimmering with a desperate kind of resolve as she prepares to admit the real reason she's been lurking in the shadows. She isn't here for a rematch or to settle a petty grudge about her bruised ego or her very public defeat. She looks Ian Purkis in the eyes with a terrifying level of sincerity, clasping her hands together as she begs him for his guidance because she is absolutely obsessed with becoming stronger. Ian's mouth curves into a slight smirk as he observes how Syria Yerdina's entire demeanor has flipped. She stands there with a visible blush, looking like a completely different person than the arrogant rival he faced just a week ago. Ian realizes he finally has his quiet life back and decides he really doesn't want to get tangled up with her drama again. Ian flashes a bright smile while holding up a finger to deliver a very firm refusal. He tells Syria Yerdina point blank that he's not going to help her, despite her desperate plea for his training. She stands there frozen, stunned that the man who humiliated her twice is now acting like he has nothing to teach. Ian starts walking away, casually waving off his victory as nothing more than a massive stroke of sheer luck. Syria Yerdina chases after him, shouting that luck is just another high-level skill in a real fight. She's not letting him off the hook that easily, but Ian is already checked out of the conversation. Ian's gold eyes narrow as a sudden, chilling realization about the timeline hits him like a physical blow. The mention of the Academy's upcoming events triggers a dark memory of the hunting festival. He recalls that this specific year was plagued by accidents involving students that were far more sinister than the faculty ever admitted. A dark silhouette of a girl named Emma appears in his mind as she kneels to gather medicinal herbs in the forest. She looks peaceful and innocent, completely unaware of the tragedy waiting for her in the dense woods. Ian remembers the cold, hard facts of the future. Emma was never supposed to make it out of those trees alive. The mental imagery shifts to a horrific scene of violence as Ian's memory details exactly how Emma's body was eventually discovered. She was found with her stomach completely ripped open, a brutal end that the Academy tried to keep quiet to avoid a scandal. Ian stands there in silence, the weight of this impending death pressing down on him. Syria Yerdina looks down at her hands, still trying to find the right words to convince him to change his mind. She's completely oblivious to the internal crisis Ian is having as he stares into the middle distance. Ian suddenly snaps back to reality and turns his head toward her with an intense, sharp stare. Ian abruptly cuts her off and suggests that she should just find someone else to bother if she's really that desperate to learn. He doesn't wait for a response before he takes off at a full sprint, leaving a confused Syria Yerdina sitting alone on the park bench. He shouts back a frantic excuse about remembering a sudden task, but he's actually racing against a ticking clock. A weathered letter covered in strange, ancient script appears, glowing with a faint, ominous light against the darkness. Ian's inner monologue reveals a deep-seated skepticism toward the contents of this mysterious message and the fate it describes. He doesn't believe a single word written in that letter, and he's clearly determined to tear the intended future apart. The ancient script on the glowing letter pulses with a dark energy as Ian Purkis reads a name he finally recognizes. He notes with growing dread that seeing his friend's name mentioned in this prophecy bothers him more than any of the other cryptic warnings. Ian realizes he has to move immediately to confirm if she is actually safe in the present timeline before the letter's predictions come true. He is certain that she would know the truth behind these events if he can just reach her before things spiral out of control. This isn't just a rumor anymore, it's a race against a clock only he can see. A weathered title card appears against a fading background, marking the transition into the third part of the first letter saga. The heavy weight of the previous revelations lingers as the narrative prepares to pivot back to the Academy grounds and the fallout of the duel. Ian Purkis is no longer just a student trying to survive his classes, he's now a man haunted by a future he's desperate to rewrite. The quiet before the storm is officially over as the next phase of his plan begins. It's time to see if his intervention has actually changed the social landscape of the school. Syria Yerdina stands amidst the quiet Academy grounds, letting out an awkward, forced cough to break the heavy silence between them. She refuses to look Ian Purkis in the eye, her usual icy and arrogant demeanor replaced by a visible, clunky attempt at being civil. Ian watches her from a few paces away, silently noting that her social skills are just as disastrously lacking as they've always been. The girl can face down a master swordsman without blinking, but she can't handle a simple conversation without making it incredibly weird. It's a bizarre sight for everyone watching the school's top genius struggle with basic manners. Syria Yerdina turns on her heel and begins to march away, her long silver hair and heavy academy cape catching the winter breeze. Ian Purkis calls out her name, telling her there's absolutely no reason for her to be in such a massive rush to escape the area. He watches her from behind, noticing the strange hesitation in her steps as she momentarily pauses at his words. Something about her stiff behavior suggests she's carrying a warning she's not quite ready to deliver to him yet. She's clearly trying to maintain her dignity, but her body language is screaming that she's overwhelmed. While standing near the wooden training dummies on the academy grounds, Syria Yerdina decides to throw Ian Purkis a rare bone. She tells him to familiarize himself with the terrain and the specific monsters of the southern forest since it's his first hunting festival. As she speaks, a massive, spectral deer with glowing blue eyes and a crown of jagged antlers manifests in a dark, ominous vision. Syria confirms the existence of high-level threats in that area with chilling, clinical precision. He's basically being told he's walking into a literal den of monsters where one wrong step means certain death. Ian Purkis processes the vital information, looking at Syria Yerdina's retreating figure with a newfound sense of urgency. He acknowledges her hint, deciding right then and there that he'll have to push even deeper into the dangerous territory during his next training session. The hunting festival is no longer just a school event for him. It's a battlefield where he has to prove he can survive the fate laid out in the letters. The pressure is mounting, and Ian knows he can't afford a single mistake if he wants to stay ahead of the coming tragedy. He's heading straight for the heart of the forest. Blood splatters across the dark, jagged bark of trees in a forest that feels more like a graveyard than a training ground. While the academy curriculum suggests students are usually strong enough to handle most beasts, the actual historical records paint a far more violent picture of this area. As the hunting festival approaches, the monsters don't just get more aggressive, they appear with a frequency that defies logic. The woods are essentially transforming into a literal death trap for anyone caught off guard by the sudden surge of predators. A golden, radiant figure of the heavenly god Ar stands at the center of a holy array, marking the very dawn of creation. This cosmic birth wasn't solitary, as the evil god Amelos rose from the shadows at the same time to provide a necessary, dark balance. Ars didn't just build the physical world, he fused it with the very flow of time to create a functioning, orderly universe. It's a rigid, divine architecture that holds every living soul in place, ensuring that the cycle of life continues without interference. An angelic entity holds the earth within a halo of golden light, reinforcing the fact that these divine laws are the only thing preventing reality from falling into total turmoil. Out in the vast, swirling blue of the cosmic void, a singular point of light represents a power that technically shouldn't exist. Any being capable of defying this established order isn't just an anomaly, they are considered a direct and immensely powerful enemy of the heavenly god. We're talking about an entity with the potential to rewrite the fundamental rules of existence. A dark silhouette of a man stands alone in a forest bathed in an eerie, hellish red light that seems to bleed from the sky. Above him, a pair of massive, glowing crimson eyes stare out with pure, unfiltered malice, dwarfing the landscape below. The name Delphome appears in bold, white letters against the darkness, marking the arrival of the ultimate antagonist. This is the shadow looming over the academy, and its presence alone feels like it's physically suffocating the world. Ian Purkis is visibly shaking, his face drenched in cold sweat as he tries to navigate a very tense conversation with his associate. Across from him, the red-haired female peer lets out a wide, exhausted yawn while stretching her arms toward the ceiling in total frustration. She's completely drained because she spent the entire night working on her own projects, only for Ian to disrupt her much-needed sleep. He's clearly testing the limits of her patience by showing up with more problems. Ian takes on a frantic, chibi-like appearance, waving his hands while trying to play off his sudden arrival with a nervous, forced laugh. His red-haired friend isn't having any of it, reminding him that he vanished for a full month before suddenly slamming her door open today. He tries to use their history as a shield, pleading with her to cut him some slack since they're supposed to be friends. They stand outside under a bright blue academy sign, and the light-hearted bickering is the only thing keeping the looming dread at bay for now. Ian Purkis holds his hands together in a frantic, prayer-like apology while his red-haired friend stares him down with a look of pure irritation. He complains that she's being way meaner to him than usual, even though he knows he's the one who barged in and woke her up. She doesn't buy the "we're friends" act for a second, demanding he explain his crazy claims a little more simply. She's clearly hit her absolute limit with his sudden reappearance and these cryptic warnings. Inside the sunlit lab filled with potion bottles, the red-haired girl points a firm finger at Ian Purkis to make her point. She explains that if he's really trying to go against the literal flow of time, he's going to need a level of strength that is basically impossible to find. She gestures dramatically, stating that there is only one being in the entire world with that kind of terrifying power. It's a heavy reality check for a guy who's already stressed out of his mind. Ian Purkis looks completely stunned, his gold eyes wide as he realizes the letters he received might actually be sent by Delphilim. The scene cuts to the massive, sprawling towers of Arancourt Academy as Ian's voice booms across the courtyard in a frustrated shout. He yells back that she was the one who brought up the name in the first place, completely losing his cool. The academy looks peaceful from the outside, but the conversation happening within its walls is anything but. Back in the lab, the red-haired girl leans forward with a grim expression, suggesting that an evil god might be the one behind all this madness. Ian Purkis quickly agrees, the weight of the situation finally settling on his shoulders as he looks toward the ground. She tells him to stop wasting time and get back to his room to make sure everything is locked down and secure. She treats his theories like a joke, but she isn't taking any chances with his safety. A deep blue magical crest glows behind Ian Purkis as he sulks about how harsh she's being to him. He thinks to himself that being treated like a total idiot just because he said something crazy is a bit much, even for her. Just as he turns to leave, she stops him, telling him to wait because she has something he needs. The tension breaks for a split second as Ian pauses, wondering what kind of help she's actually willing to offer. 2 glass vials filled with a glowing, electric blue liquid cross over a shimmering magical circle. The red-haired girl explains that these are her brand new presence-erasing drugs and she wants him to test the product out. Ian Purkis holds one of the tubes up, watching the liquid swirl as she clarifies it won't make him invisible, just impossible to notice. This is the ultimate tool for a guy who needs to move through the academy without drawing any more unwanted attention. Ian Purkis tilts his head back and drains the entire test tube of glowing blue liquid in a single, reckless gulp. He immediately makes a disgusted face, stating bluntly that the experimental concoction tastes like absolute garbage. The red-haired girl looks like she's about to have a heart attack, screaming that he shouldn't have just downed something that valuable without a plan. Ian just wants to see if the drug actually functions, and he isn't interested in waiting around for a slow, clinical demonstration. The red-haired peer gives in and shuts her eyes, attempting to track Ian Purkis using only her innate mana perception. A violent aura of sapphire energy suddenly wraps around Ian's legs and torso, flickering like a cold, ghostly flame. His gold eyes gleam through the magical haze as the transformation takes a firm hold of his physical form. He can feel his very existence thinning out as the presence-erasing properties of the drug begin to overwrite his reality. Ian Purkis stares at his own hand as it turns into a transparent, wispy vapor that nearly blends into the background of the room. He notes that the sensation is bizarre, as if he has transitioned into a wandering spirit that no longer belongs to the living world. In his mind, he's already visualizing the massive tactical advantage this will give him during the high-stakes hunting festival. He can move through the academy grounds like a shadow, avoiding every obstacle and rival without ever being detected. The red-haired girl's face suddenly darkens with a shadow of intense frustration, and she pounces on Ian Purkis with surprising speed. She grabs him by the collar of his academy uniform, shaking him while demanding to know how he spotted the defect so easily. Ian looks genuinely confused, having no idea what she's even talking about while he's hanging helplessly in her grip. It turns out that while the visual cloak is perfect, there is a glaring technical failure she didn't anticipate. She let out a frustrated yell, pointing out that the human odor is still completely there, making the entire invisibility effect useless against a keen nose. She realizes this is a total no-go for a real stealth mission and curses herself for forgetting such a basic detail during her solo tests. The realization hits her hard, and she knows she needs to get back to her lab immediately to solve the scent problem. A stealth drug that leaves a trail of human scent is basically just a dinner bell for the monsters waiting in the dark. The red-haired peer calms down slightly, questioning why she's even stressed about a guy as insanely strong as Ian Purkis in the first place. She watches him tuck the remaining gear away as he prepares to head back toward his own dorms for the night. Ian mentions that he's going to take the second tube into the woods later to provide her with some actual field data. Her expression turns dead serious as she tells him to stay far away from that forest until the hunting festival officially begins. The red-haired peer leans in close with an expression of total gravity, her sharp green eyes locking onto Ian Purkis as she delivers a final, non-negotiable command. She tells him that if he really feels the need to venture into those dangerous woods for field data, he absolutely must call her first so she can watch his back. Her intense, protective demeanor suddenly melts away into a bright and cheerful smile that feels almost out of place given the high stakes they just discussed. As she walks away, the sun begins to sink below the horizon, casting long, jagged shadows across the sprawling Arancourt Academy and turning the sky into a sea of burning orange and gold. The vibrant colors of the sunset are quickly replaced by a cold, indigo night sky that stretches out over the silent academy dormitories. Ian Purkis is back in his quarters, hunched over and staring at a piece of parchment with a look of pure, unadulterated dread etched into his features. He mutters a quiet, frustrated "damn it" to the empty room before letting his body fall limp onto the mattress, his red and black academy cape trailing behind him like a funeral shroud. The physical exhaustion of the duel and the mental weight of his future knowledge have finally caught up to him, leaving him looking completely defeated in the dim, flickering light. The heavy silence is shattered when a brown-haired student bursts through the door, his face flushed with anger and visible frustration marks popping up on his forehead. He immediately begins shouting at Ian Purkis, demanding to know where he disappeared to earlier in the day and why he's been acting so strangely lately. Ian remains motionless on the bed, his golden eyes staring blankly into the shadows while his roommate leans over him, desperate for any kind of reaction or explanation. The tension in the room spikes as the roommate finally brings up the one name Ian was hoping to avoid, asking with genuine concern how Emma is doing and if her condition has improved. The roommate's voice grows even louder as he calls Ian's silence complete nonsense, but the atmosphere turns pitch black as a gruesome report begins to manifest in Ian's mind. A horrific flashback reveals the tragedy of the medicinal department, where Emma was brutally ambushed by a high-rank monster while she was out alone gathering rare herbs for her studies. The details are stomach-churning, describing how the beast lunged from the brush and used its claws to literally rip her stomach open before she could even scream for help. The final, haunting image shows Emma standing alone in the blood-soaked woods, her body surrounded by a flickering purple aura and her eyes devoid of any life whatsoever. A dark, oppressive aura fills the screen as a voice asks how she could possibly not be in such a state. A lingering letter speaks of a distant lover and the pain of ignored messages, highlighting a deep sense of abandonment. Ian Purkis is then shown in a striking combat pose alongside a powerful female companion, ready for the trials ahead. The weight of past regrets is clearly beginning to collide with the dangers of the present. The camera pulls back to reveal a massive, ornate cathedral complex that looks more like a fortress than a place of worship. Inside, a man named Emmanuel is shown in a state of absolute physical collapse, his hands trembling as he clutches the fabric of his own shirt. He is sobbing so hard he can barely breathe, the agony of his daughter's fate radiating off the page. The guy is clearly at his breaking point, and the cold stone walls offer him no comfort. A woman with ethereal purple hair and sharp, pink eyes stares forward with a gaze that feels completely devoid of human warmth. This is the Saintess, and she delivers a cold, formal greeting from the holy nation to the grieving Emmanuel. Ian Purkis stands in the center of the massive, golden-lit hall, looking small against the weight of the religious authority being projected. The tension in the room is high enough to snap a sword blade. The Saintess explains that because monsters were so rare in that area, Emma likely let her guard down before the attack. She reveals the grim detail that Emma only survived the initial mauling because she managed to drink a potion that made her look dead to the creature. It is a terrifying thought, imagining the girl lying there bleeding while pretending to be a corpse. The people in the room look toward the Saintess, hoping her divine power can finally end this nightmare. The Saintess immediately crushes those hopes, stating flatly that divine power is not all-powerful and requires a balance. She demands an offering of immense value in exchange for a miracle, essentially putting a bounty on a dying girl's recovery. Ian Purkis explodes in anger, shouting that the daughter of a simple herbalist would never have access to such expensive resources. The Saintess barely reacts, looking back with a chilling, sidelong glance that proves she values coin over lives. The towering arches of the Academy's Grand Hall are bathed in a cold, artificial light as a voice confirms that Emma's father is arriving. Ian Purkis stands his ground amidst the sea of white pillars, his silhouette rigid against the oppressive architecture. He flatly refuses the suggestion to leave, deciding he will face the man whose life is about to be ruined. It is the decision of a man who feels he owes a debt of blood to the family he failed to protect. Ian Purkis clenches his fist so hard that the fabric of his uniform groans, the sound echoing his internal turmoil. He stares at the floor, repeating the agonizing truth that he was the very last person to see Emma before she was taken. The Saintess Emmanuel watches him with a single, piercing pink eye, her expression remaining entirely unmoved by his obvious distress. She calmly states that this tragedy is not anyone's fault, attempting to absolve the room of the guilt that is currently suffocating Ian Purkis. The Saintess Emmanuel adjusts her gold-banded ring with a slow, methodical grace that feels chillingly detached from the situation. She offers a hollow blessing, telling Ian Purkis that she hopes he can regain his peace of mind after this ordeal. Standing in her full, ornate robes, she looks like a divine statue, radiating a golden aura that does nothing to warm the freezing atmosphere of the hall. Her holiness feels like a polished mask, hiding a woman who views human suffering as a mere variable in a balance sheet. A bright, blinding flash of light fills the air as the name Emmanuel hangs in the silence like a curse. Ian Purkis suddenly snaps, throwing his entire weight into a desperate, violent punch that slams directly into the solid stone wall. The impact sends a shockwave through his arm, but he barely feels the physical pain over the roar of his own self-hatred. He growls a curse at the world, his face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage at his own powerlessness. Ian Purkis shouts into the empty space, his voice cracking as he realizes that Emma could have run away if he had only acted sooner. His mind is fixated on Leto, the father who is currently walking into a living nightmare because of a future Ian failed to change. The scene shifts to the floor where Leto's shadow looms, his legs shaking as he lets out a guttural, soul-shredding scream for his daughter. The raw agony in that cry is enough to make the very walls of the academy feel like they are closing in. Leto collapses onto the hard ground, his hands clutching at the air as if he could pull Emma back from the void. He wails her name over and over, his voice echoing through the sterile halls in a way that makes the saintess's previous blessings feel like a sick joke. He stays on his knees, head bowed in total defeat, asking the heavens why this had to happen to his innocent child. Ian Purkis can only watch, forced to witness the total destruction of a man's spirit while the weight of his own secrets drags him further into the dark. Emma's father looks up from the floor with bloodshot, pleading eyes, asking Ian Purkis if he truly knows his daughter. The man is a complete wreck, his face stained with tears and grime as he begs for a single chance to see Emma's face one last time. It's the kind of raw, unfiltered desperation that makes the academy's polished walls feel like a cage. He isn't even asking for a miracle or a fight at this point. He just wants the basic dignity of saying goodbye to his child. Ian Purkis and his companion stand in stunned silence while the weight of their social standing crushes any hope of a quick solution. As mere countryside nobles, they simply didn't have the astronomical wealth required to pay for the divine offerings that might have secured a higher tier of healing. They were forced to stand by and listen to the empty promises of priests who claimed to be doing their best while Emma's life slipped away. This is the brutal reality of a world where even a person's survival has a literal price tag attached to it. Ian Purkis reaches into his cloak and produces a small glass vial filled with a shimmering, glowing blue liquid. He explains that this is a specialized new potion his red-haired friend was so proud of, and he offers it to Emma's father with a trembling hand. The light from the magical tonic reflects in the man's tear-filled eyes, creating a sharp contrast against the gloom of the hallway. Ian Purkis is clearly trying to offer a lifeline, but it feels like he's trying to fix a shattered mountain with a handful of glue. Emma's father refuses the gift, looking at Ian Purkis with a haunting sense of selflessness as he tells the young master to keep the medicine for himself. He lunges forward and grips Ian Purkis's red uniform with both hands, his fingers digging into the fabric in a moment of pure, unadulterated agony. The man's voice cracks as he repeats his plea, desperate for any shred of comfort or information in the wake of his devastating loss. Seeing a grown man reduced to this level of begging is enough to make the air in the room feel heavy and suffocating. Ian Purkis stares down into the man's broken expression, his golden eyes shimmering with a sudden, devastating clarity. He realizes that his previous knowledge of the timeline and the Delphi should have given him every tool necessary to stop this disaster before it ever started. The realization hits him like a physical blow, confirming that this tragedy isn't just a random misfortune, but a personal failure of his own intervention. The crushing guilt of what he could have prevented is now a permanent shadow that will follow him through the academy halls. A glowing text bubble hangs over a dimly lit room as Ian Purkis dwells on his massive oversight regarding the timeline. He realizes that giving Emma a simple, vague warning before he left was a tactical disaster that solved nothing. He stares down at a weathered letter filled with cryptic, cramped writing that supposedly details the dark events of the future. The weight of this knowledge is clearly eating him alive while he stands alone in the silence. Crumpled balls of discarded paper litter the wooden floor around Ian Purkis's boots in the blue-tinted shadows. He is stuck in a frustrating loop of doubt because he has no way to verify if the letter is a cruel prank or a genuine prophecy. Despite the total lack of evidence, a gnawing gut feeling tells him he cannot simply let the contents of the letter go ignored. He is essentially preparing to gamble his reputation on a hunch that the world is about to end. Ian Purkis stands perfectly still in the center of the dark room with his long shadow stretching across the polished floorboards. He makes the final, internal decision to treat every word in the letter as absolute fact to prevent the tragedy it describes. He carefully smooths out the rough parchment and begins to fold it with steady, deliberate hands. There is no turning back for him once he commits to physically changing the path of destiny. Ian Purkis slides the folded prophecy deep into the inner pocket of his red and black academy uniform for safekeeping. He fastens his coat over the hidden message, sealing the secret away where no one else can see his true motivations. The scene shifts abruptly as the title for Chapter 5 flashes across the screen, marking the official start of his desperate intervention. The stage is set for a collision between his knowledge and the reality of the academy. Leto Amstron's face is contorted in a comical, wide-mouthed shout as he realizes Ian Purkis is actually searching for a specific girl. He lunges forward and grabs Ian Purkis's shoulder, completely losing his mind over the idea of his stoic friend finally showing interest in a woman. Leto Amstron makes a massive scene in the middle of the bright academy courtyard, drawing far too much attention. This guy clearly has zero filter when it comes to juicy gossip. Ian Purkis maintains a cold, focused expression while Leto Amstron continues to badger him with loud, annoying theories about his love life. He ignores the teasing entirely and asks Leto Amstron if he actually found the name Emma in the official student register. Leto Amstron just shrugs it off, suggesting the girl is using a fake name while he floats in a daze of romantic delusions. The search for the girl is hitting a wall, and the ticking clock of the prophecy is only getting louder. Ian Purkis is officially at his breaking point, his face flushed with pure irritation as he yells directly into his roommate's face. He's trying to explain that his obsession with this girl isn't romantic and that he simply has something vital he needs to ask her. Leto Amsterdam doesn't even get to finish his smug, teasing grin before he's cut off by a sudden, sharp ACK, as Ian delivers a quick, physical reality check. Ian Purkis marches away with his white-gloved fist clenched tight, leaving a dazed Leto Amsterdam literally steaming from the head like a cartoon. As Leto recovers from the blow, he manages to pivot the conversation back to the name Sepia, pointing out that it is actually the name of a flower. This changes the entire trajectory of their search, as it confirms the girl might be hiding behind a regional alias to avoid being tracked through official channels. A shimmering, bioluminescent blue flower floats against a backdrop of deep indigo and sparkling magical light. Leto Amsterdam explains that these flowers are a common sight across the frozen landscapes of the north, making Sepia a very likely nickname for a local. The mention of the north acts like a trigger for Ian Purkis, his golden eyes narrowing as a realization hits him with the force of a lightning bolt. Ian Purkis and Leto Amsterdam stand together in the center of the sprawling stone courtyard, the weight of the mystery finally settling between them. Ian stares into the distance, stating that if they are talking about a powerful figure from the north, there is only one person that fits the bill at this academy. The two of them slowly pivot their gaze toward the shadows of the nearby trees, sensing someone lurking just out of their immediate line of sight. Syria Yerdina is caught dead to rights, hiding behind a massive tree trunk with her hands gripped tightly against the rough, dark bark. Her silver hair catches the sunlight, but it's her bright red, blushing face that gives away her sheer embarrassment at being spotted eavesdropping. Ian Purkis looks directly at her, calmly noting that the Yerdina family is the only northern powerhouse he's aware of, making her presence here anything but a coincidence. The quiet air is suddenly shattered by a frantic shout as Syria Yerdina tells them both to just get lost, while her face continues to burn. She steps out from her hiding spot, aggressively thrusting a heavy white cloth bag into the air toward Ian Purkis. She screams that this is just compensation for the lessons he's been giving her, her eyes squeezed shut as if she's bracing for a physical explosion. Syria Yerdina stands perfectly still, her silver hair fluttering as she maintains her aggressive gifting stance with her eyes tightly shut. The bag she's holding is tied neatly and looks surprisingly heavy, suggesting she put a significant amount of thought into this payment. She's essentially forcing Ian Purkis to take it, using her typical Yerdina intensity to mask the fact that she's currently dying of social agony in front of both boys. Ian Purkis stares down at the heavy, glowing bag in his hands with a look of absolute bewilderment. He's completely thrown off by the sudden payment and asks what kind of compensation she's even talking about. Syria Yerdina keeps her gaze fixed on the ground, her face flushing a deep crimson as she admits that she felt it was bad manners to demand his guidance without offering something in return. It's a surreal sight to see a high-ranking noble acting this flustered over basic social etiquette. Confusion practically radiates off Ian Purkis as he tries to make sense of her intense dedication to following him around. He doesn't hold back and asks her directly why she's so desperate for his guidance when there are literal masters at the academy. Syria Yerdina looks up, her blue eyes piercing as she declares that she has nothing left to learn from anyone else. She has officially decided that Ian is the only person capable of pushing her past her current limits. Ian Purkis takes a moment to observe her, noting that while she's still intense, her attitude has definitely softened compared to their first meeting. He realizes that there's a unique kind of growth that only happens when you face someone you simply cannot overcome. Even so, Ian tries to deflect the responsibility, telling her again that he doesn't have the formal ability to train someone of her caliber. He's trying to stay under the radar, but her obsession is making that nearly impossible. Ian Purkis straightens his red academy cape, telling her that she's destined to reach the top on her own even without his help. He drops a mention of the upcoming hunting festival, suggesting that will be the real test of her current abilities. The second the words leave his mouth, Syria Yerdina's expression shifts from desperation to sharp intrigue. She repeats the name of the festival as if it's the most important piece of information she's heard all year. A close-up of Ian's face shows his gold eyes glowing with a cold, calculating intensity as he reflects on his own survival. He knows deep down that if he doesn't find a way to skyrocket his strength, the upcoming events will swallow him whole. He calls out to Syria Yerdina, his voice dropping to a serious tone that commands her full attention. The playful tension from before is gone, replaced by the grim weight of his secret knowledge and the stakes at hand. Glowing text flashes across the screen, revealing that Ian's primary goal is to verify if Syria Yerdina is actually the mysterious warrior, Sepia. A few days of grueling training pass by in a flash, leading the duo deep into the dangerous outskirts of the forest. Ian Purkis and Syria Yerdina stand ready with their blades unsheathed, looking like a lethal pair of hunters against the backdrop of the dense trees. Syria suddenly bursts into motion, her sword whistling through the air as she begins a high-speed combat drill that looks absolutely terrifying. Syria Yerdina is a blur of silver hair and steel as she carves through the forest greenery with violent precision. She isn't just practicing her form, she is pushing herself with a desperate, manic energy that makes her look like a cornered animal. The crazy part is that she's clearly learned how to ignore physical pain entirely during her isolation. It is an unsettling sight to behold. Ian Purkis watches her from the sidelines, his face pale with genuine concern as he tracks her jagged movements. He realizes that while she is a genius with a blade, Syria Yerdina is absolutely clueless when it comes to basic self-preservation. He finally snaps and shouts her name, forcing her to halt her assault before she literally breaks her own body from the strain. She looks like she's about to collapse right there in the dirt. Ian Purkis steps toward her, mentioning how high-ranking nobles often abuse healing potions to train past the point of total exhaustion. Syria Yerdina slumps onto a jagged rock, her back turned to him as she tries to suck oxygen back into her lungs. She dismisses his worry, claiming a single potion will fix any damage she's done to herself. It's a classic noble mindset, thinking money can just delete physical trauma. A close-up of her feet shows the red, raw toll this training is taking on her joints despite her claims. Ian Purkis explains that potions are just a chemical band-aid and won't fix the underlying fatigue building up in her actual bones. He crouches down beside her, bringing up the fact that she previously called this year her last chance. He isn't letting this go until he gets a real answer. The air between them turns heavy as Ian Purkis demands to know why she is carrying so much crippling anxiety. Syria Yerdina admits there is a specific fourth-year student she is obsessed with defeating before they graduate and leave the academy grounds. Ian suggests a logical alternative, just asking for a duel after they graduate, but that is clearly a death sentence in her mind. Syria Yerdina looks down at her hands, her voice trembling as she explains that time is running out to challenge this person on equal footing. The bombshell finally drops. If she tried to fight this individual outside the academy, she would be facing the head of her family and would be exiled instantly. Ian Purkis stands there frozen, realizing the person she is hunting is likely the successor to the entire Yerdina name. The stage is set for a family bloodbath that the academy won't be able to stop. Ian Purkis stands with a grim focus, his voice barely a whisper as he confirms a terrifying truth. A golden-haired figure suddenly dominates the vision, her sword radiating a blinding, celestial light that represents the peak of the family's power. This is the monster Syria Yerdina has to eventually kill if she ever wants to be free. The sheer pressure coming off this image makes it clear why she is so desperate for help. Syria Yerdina sits perched on a jagged rock while Ian Purkis kneels in the dirt to tend to her needs. She leans forward with a haunting intensity, asking if there is still a chance to strike even after her sister graduates and leaves the academy. The vulnerability in her posture is a sharp contrast to her usual icy demeanor. She is essentially begging for a path forward in a world that has already counted her out. Syria Yerdina stares into the distance, her face framed by a swirl of dark, ominous energy that signals her rising killing intent. Her blue eyes suddenly snap into focus, glowing with a frigid light that looks like it could freeze the very air around her. She has completely abandoned any hope of a peaceful resolution. This is the look of someone who has accepted that their only way out is through a mountain of bodies. A title card for the first letter flashes on the screen, pulling us back into a memory of a cold, unforgiving winter. Syria Yerdina is seen sprawled in the snow, her face twisted in a mix of physical pain and soul-crushing betrayal. She cries out against the blatant unfairness of a duel where the rules were changed just to ensure her failure. This is the exact moment her heart turned into a block of ice. A dark, mocking silhouette looms over the fallen girl, her golden hair catching the light as she looks down with pure contempt. This woman offers a backhanded compliment, praising Syria Yerdina for the sheer stupidity of fighting a battle where she had no allies. A cruel, sharp smile spreads across the sister's face as she relishes her total victory. It is a level of arrogance that only someone with absolute power can afford to display. The screen goes black as the weight of the Yerdina family's betrayal is laid out in cold, hard text. Every single person in the bloodline has already sworn their loyalty to the older sister, leaving Syria Yerdina with nothing but her own shadow. There is no one coming to save her, and no home to return to after the fighting is over. She is fighting a war against her own name, and the odds are stacked a mile high. The perspective shifts back to the present-day forest where the light hits the silver hair of Syria Yerdina from behind. Ian Purkis finishes his work and stands up, casually mentioning that the treatment is complete and she can finally move her body again. He has successfully put the pieces of this broken girl back together for the upcoming slaughter. The tension is thick enough to cut as the duo prepares to move deeper into the dark. Ian Purkis rises slowly from the damp forest floor after finishing his work on Syria Yerdina. He looks down at her with a heavy, contemplative gaze, his mind drifting back to the fragmented memories of a future that hasn't happened yet. In that world of ash and ruin, this girl wasn't just a struggling student, she was one of his most trusted allies on the front lines. Seeing her in this vulnerable, fractured state is a jarring contrast to the hardened warrior he once knew. It is a bitter reminder of the weight he carries as the only one who knows how far she has to fall. A white-gloved hand grips the hilt of a gleaming straight sword as the golden light of a setting sun reflects off the polished steel. Ian Purkis stands alone on a high ridge, overlooking a vast, untouched wilderness that stretches toward the horizon like a sea of emerald and gold. He drives the tip of his blade into the earth with a sharp thud, claiming the ground beneath him as if preparing for an inevitable siege. This isn't just a scenic view for him, it is the designated slaughterhouse for the Academy's most prestigious and dangerous trial. He stands there like a silent sentinel, watching the calm before the coming storm. Massive golden glyphs fracture the air above the forest, crackling with an immense amount of concentrated mana. Ian Purkis finds himself back in the heat of the Academy's bustling courtyard, surrounded by the chaotic energy of students preparing for war. This is the start of the hunting festival, a legendary event that serves as the ultimate litmus test for the Arancourt elite. While the other students are laughing and checking their gear like it's a weekend excursion, Ian knows the true body count this festival is capable of producing. It is a brutal tradition that masks a blood sport under the guise of academic excellence. Ian Purkis's eyes are swallowed by deep shadows while a hellish red aura erupts behind him, mimicking the carnage he knows is coming. The festival is a raw, unapologetic competition to see who can track down and execute the most terrifying magical beasts in the region. A massive, glowing gate of energy hums in the distance, serving as the literal threshold between the safety of the Academy and the lawless terror of the woods. It's a meat grinder designed to separate the true predators from the prey. Anyone entering that gate without a killer instinct is essentially signing their own death warrant. Ian Purkis tilts his head back, watching the sunlight bleed through the dense canopy of the ancient trees that border the festival grounds. His mind is a mess of conflicting data, recalling internal Academy reports and rumors about how the original timeline was supposed to play out. According to the script, Syria Yerdina was destined to form a deep, life-changing bond with another student named Sepia during the heat of this hunt. These predetermined fates are written in a history Ian is currently tearing to pieces with every step he takes. He is a glitch in the system, and the system is starting to feel the pressure of his presence. Ian Purkis stands firm as the crimson light of his Academy cape catches the wind, his expression hardening into a mask of pure resolve. He admits to himself that even though he claims to be a pragmatist, the idea of these forced destinies is starting to get under his skin. He is tired of the world trying to dictate who lives and who dies based on a story he's already read. Syria Yerdina's voice suddenly snaps him out of his dark trance, her sharp command echoing through the clearing as she tells him it's time to move out. The period of quiet reflection is officially over, and the hunt is about to begin. Ian is tearing through the forest at a breakneck pace, leaving Syria struggling to match his sudden burst of speed. She finally pulls him to a halt, looking completely exasperated as she asks why he is in such a frantic rush. Syria leans in with an annoyed glare, calling him a total idiot for acting so impulsively. It's clear she thinks he's lost his mind with this sudden, unnecessary intensity. Ian and Syria slow down to a walk as he tries to justify his concern for the girl he previously defeated. He mentions that normally people wouldn't want to train with someone who just beat them, but Syria isn't buying his logic. She reminds him that the girl actually spent a good amount of time trailing behind him like a lost puppy right after their fight. She is visibly annoyed that Ian is even giving this other girl a second thought during their mission. Syria's face is scrunched up in a frustrated pout as she demands to know why he's taking that girl's side. She lets out a sharp huff, her eyes burning with a mix of irritation and what looks like genuine jealousy. She is practically fuming, feeling like Ian is being way too protective of a stranger. The air between them is thick with her unspoken frustration while she waits for him to explain himself. Ian suddenly reaches out and grabs Syria's face with both hands, pulling her in close to look at him. Syria's entire body stiffens as her eyes grow wide with pure shock at the sudden, intimate gesture. A deep, vivid blush spreads across her cheeks as her brain completely short-circuits from the physical contact. This is the last thing she expected him to do in the middle of a heated argument. Ian leans in even closer while keeping his hands firmly on her cheeks, his golden eyes scanning her face with intense focus. He breaks the silence by asking if she changed her perfume, his voice sounding calm and genuinely curious. Syria is frozen in place, her heart hammering against her ribs as she tries to process his words. He is being incredibly bold right now, and it's making the situation feel far more heavy than it was a second ago. Syria looks down with a panicked, blushing expression, her usual cold composure completely shattered. She starts to stammer, weakly explaining that it isn't perfume and that it might just be the scent of her new facial cleanser. She starts fidgeting with her fingers, looking like she wants the ground to swallow her whole. This is definitely the most vulnerable and flustered she has ever been around him. Syria focuses on the ground while they keep walking, desperately trying to pivot the conversation back to their actual mission. She asks Ian if he knows what kind of practical exercises they are going to be doing today since it is her first time participating. She is doing everything in her power to act like a professional soldier again to hide her embarrassment. The tension is still there, but they are finally back to focusing on the task at hand. Ian Purkis looks away, his golden eyes narrowed as he contemplates the immediate future with a heavy heart. He mutters a quiet, almost ironic hope that they won't run into any magical beasts during this outing. The reality of the situation is far more grim because the secret letter he has been obsessing over says a beast attack is a guaranteed event. This isn't just a simple hunch or a nervous thought. It is a fixed point in the timeline he is desperately trying to navigate. Shadows fall over Ian Purkis's face as the true gravity of the impending disaster begins to settle in. He realizes that while he might be able to prevent some casualties, the scale of the predicted attack means the death toll could still be catastrophic. He clenches his jaw and mentally cements his resolve to stop the slaughter at any cost, regardless of how it makes him look to the academy. This is the moment where he stops being just a student and fully accepts the role of a hidden protector. Ian Purkis stands firm as the red fabric of his academy uniform stands out against the dark, ominous backdrop of his internal struggle. He acknowledges the heavy burden of being the only person alive who knows the contents of the warning letters and the tragedy they foretell. The memory of the cryptic script flashes through his mind like a curse that he cannot simply ignore or share with the authorities. It is a lonely and dangerous position to be in, but he is the only one who can act on this forbidden knowledge. An instructor with sharp features stands in the middle of a sun-drenched forest clearing, shouting to demand everyone's immediate and undivided attention. He doesn't waste any time with pleasantries and tells the gathered students exactly why they need to stay on high alert today. He brings up the recent, terrifying incident where a student was nearly mauled at the very entrance of these woods. The fact that magical beasts are migrating this far out of their usual territory is a bad sign that no one should be ignoring. Ian Purkis stares ahead with a cold intensity while Syria Yerdina stands silently in the background, observing the tension in the air. The instructor continues to emphasize that these beasts are acting completely against their natural instincts by coming so close to the academy's safe zones. Usually, the perimeter is considered a low-risk area, but the rules of the forest are clearly being rewritten by an unseen, malevolent force. The ecosystem is collapsing, and that usually precedes a total bloodbath for anyone caught unprepared in the thicket. A student nearby attempts a practice swing, only for his blade to get caught in the low-hanging branches of the dense, unforgiving forest. The instructor yells out a final, stern warning about how the cramped environment will make it nearly impossible to use standard sword techniques. In a real fight against a fast-moving monster, a blocked swing or a snagged blade is a literal death sentence. The terrain has officially become the student's second biggest enemy, and the real slaughter hasn't even started yet. Ian Purkis stands amidst the dense foliage as the instructor's voice carries a heavy warning through the humid air. The magical beasts lurking in these shadows are born and bred in this chaos, making the uneven terrain their ultimate playground. A student's hand tightens around a sword hilt until a jagged, blood-red aura suddenly erupts from the steel with a low hum. It is a grim reminder that while the students are struggling to find their footing, the monsters are already closing in. A swordsman is completely enveloped in a massive, swirling pillar of crimson energy that looks like it could melt through solid stone. High-level experts have the rare ability to materialize their internal aura into a physical force, effectively turning their spirits into weapons. This level of power usually makes a warrior the undisputed apex predator in any standard engagement. However, even the most legendary aura can't rewrite the laws of physics when you're trapped in a literal wooden cage. A blade slams into a massive, gnarled tree trunk with a violent crack and a shower of white-hot sparks. Instead of slicing through the obstacle, the sword gets wedged deep into the wood, leaving the student frantically pulling at his weapon. The boy's face pales as he realizes his entire defensive line just vanished because he misjudged a single swing. In this forest, a blocked trajectory isn't just an inconvenience, it is a wide-open invitation for a beast to rip your throat out. The students look like small, fragile shadows as they move deeper into the dark woods, surrounded by massive roots that look like sleeping giants. The instructor hammers home the point that no amount of sword mastery allows a person to ignore the reality of their environment. Every single leaf and vine is a variable that can either save your life or lead you straight into a grave. The forest is a living obstacle course that is actively fighting back against every step the academy takes. Ian Purkis watches the group as the order is given to maintain a very specific, tactical distance from one another. The students are told to form pairs immediately so they can maintain some semblance of mobility while covering their partner's blind spots. It is a desperate attempt to bring some order to the natural disorder of the dense brush. Moving in pairs is their only hope for survival, but even that plan falls apart the second someone loses sight of their teammate in the fog. Dark, ominous shadows stretch across the forest floor as the instructor issues a final, chilling command to avoid the center of the woods. A recent, unexplained incident has turned the heart of this territory into a death zone that even the instructors are wary of entering. The strategy is to stay together to concentrate their combat power, but the terrain is so cramped that a large group is basically just a buffet for a pack of beasts. They are being forced to balance safety and speed in a place that offers absolutely neither. Ian stares down at the ground, his mind racing through the consequences of telling the truth about the future. He knows that shouting about impending doom without proof would just make him and his allies look absolutely crazy to the academy staff. A colossal shadow of a wolf with glowing, ethereal purple eyes and jagged fangs manifests behind his thoughts like a bad omen. To prevent the upcoming slaughter, Ian settles on a plan to discover a group of magical beasts and report it to the professors immediately. This lie is his only weapon against a fate that's already been written. A small, bubbly version of a girl suddenly appears in a mental bubble, shouting for Ian to team up with her. Reality snaps back as Ian reaches out and grips Syria Yerdina's shoulder with a firm, white-gloved hand. Syria Yerdina's eyes go wide and her mouth hangs open in total shock at the sudden intimacy. She looks completely flustered, her usual warrior's sternness melting away into a panicked, red-faced mess. It's a hilarious contrast to the life-or-death mission they're supposed to be focusing on right now. The world shifts into a blur of motion as they head deeper into the heart of the woods. Ian and Syria Yerdina walk through a corridor of towering trees, their academy uniforms standing out against the vibrant green foliage. They are technically staying within the boundaries set by their instructors, but the air feels thick and stagnant. Ian keeps a hand near his weapon, his gold eyes darting between the shadows cast by the afternoon sun. He's waiting for the other shoe to drop, knowing the piece is just a thin veil. Ian pauses his stride and looks back at Syria Yerdina, his expression hardening into one of suspicion. He notes that the environment feels completely wrong and voices his concern about how eerie the silence has become. Syria Yerdina stops beside him, her silver hair shimmering as she focuses her senses on the surrounding thicket. She admits that she hasn't sensed the presence of a single magical beast in the entire area. In a territory that should be crawling with predators, this absolute void of life is terrifyingly abnormal. Ian's internal alarm bells are screaming because there is no way a scout as talented as Syria Yerdina would just miss a monster's trail. He knows her ability to detect mana and bloodlust is second to none, which means something is masking the beast's presence. He calmly suggests they take a breather, acting as if they've let their guard down. Syria Yerdina gives a sharp nod, agreeing that a break isn't a problem while she remains hyper-aware of her surroundings. They are putting their lives on the line just to draw the hidden threat out into the light. The camera pulls back to show the duo standing in a vast, sun-drenched clearing filled with orange and gold autumn leaves. The massive trunks of the trees look like silent sentinels watching their every move from the periphery. A single sound effect for silence hangs in the air, emphasizing that not even a bird is chirping in this part of the woods. They are two small figures lost in a sea of orange, completely vulnerable to whatever is lurking in the dark. The stage is set for a confrontation that will likely leave the forest floor stained red. Syria Yerdina is looking down at the forest floor, her fingers nervously twitching together while she tries to find her words. She is standing in a pool of soft sunlight, looking completely different from her usual cold, elite self. After a long pause, she finally looks up with a flicker of genuine worry, asking Ian Purkis point-blank if she is the only person here who actually considers them to be friends. It's a rare moment of vulnerability for the silver-haired prodigy, and the silence that follows is heavy. Ian Purkis remains leaning against a massive tree trunk, his golden eyes fixed on her as he lets the question hang in the air. Syria Yerdina starts to blush, her cheeks turning a visible shade of pink as she wonders if she needs to offer him some kind of formal compensation in return for his companionship. She is essentially treating a simple human connection like a high-stakes contract negotiation. It is honestly a bit painful to watch her struggle with something so basic. Syria Yerdina suggests that she could pay him in gold or provide some other material reward once they safely make it back to the academy dorms. Ian Purkis looks visibly uncomfortable at the suggestion, raising a gloved hand to scratch the back of his messy brown hair while a bead of sweat rolls down his face. He calmly explains that friends are supposed to do normal things, like having actual conversations or just going for walks together. He is basically giving her a Friendship 101 crash course while they are surrounded by the dangers of the forest. The orange light of the setting sun filters through the canopy as Syria Yerdina asks if she can pivot to a question that might come off as a bit rude. Ian Purkis tells her to go ahead, but the mood shifts instantly as his golden eyes narrow with an intense, sharp focus. Syria Yerdina stares him down with those piercing blue eyes and asks if his real motivation for everything he's doing is just to take revenge on the magical beasts. The lightheartedness of the conversation is completely dead now, replaced by a sudden, chilling tension. Ian Purkis drops his gaze, his face falling into a deep, dark shadow that completely hides his expression from Syria Yerdina. He mutters that he doesn't know the answer, his voice sounding uncharacteristically hollow and cold compared to before. Suddenly, he clenches his fist so tightly that his white tactical gloves strain against his knuckles, and he shouts that he doesn't know with a sudden burst of repressed anger. This guy is clearly carrying some massive, heavy trauma that is right on the verge of exploding. The stage is set for an absolute bloodbath once those monsters finally show their faces. Ian Purkis stands amidst the autumn brush, his face twisted in a raw, pained yell as he vents his internal frustration. He clenches his white tactical gloves until they nearly tear, declaring that his hunt for these beasts is absolutely not about revenge. The mental strain looks like it's physically shattering the world around him as he fights to stay grounded. It's a rare, terrifying glimpse behind the mask of the Academy's most unpredictable student. Syria Yerdina tilts her head down, her silver hair catching the fading light as she tries to wrap her head around Ian Purkis's motivations. She brings her hands together in a rare moment of vulnerability and asks him what a friendship is even supposed to look like. Ian Purkis gives her a blunt, honest answer, explaining that it isn't a checklist but something that just happens naturally. He makes it sound so simple, even though their lives are anything but. The two continue their trek through the forest, their shadows stretching long across the moss and fallen logs. Syria Yerdina pushes him further, asking what his move would be if a magical beast suddenly jumped out and attacked her. Ian Purkis responds without a second of doubt, vowing to take the monster down because he genuinely considers her his friend. His red cape flutters in the wind like a warning sign to anything lurking in the dark. Syria Yerdina's blue eyes lock onto him, repeating his words as if she's trying to memorize the weight of them. Ian Purkis clarifies that he isn't a mindless berserker and has no intention of rushing blindly into a slaughter. He plants his feet firmly on the forest floor, his posture shifting into a combat-ready stance to ensure they aren't walking into an ambush. The atmosphere has turned suffocatingly heavy, signaling that the peaceful part of the hike is officially over. Ian Purkis's golden eyes dart toward the thicket, catching a ripple in the mana that shouldn't exist. He sharply tells Syria Yerdina to shush and focus, his senses dialed into the absolute maximum. Even though Syria Yerdina claims she can't feel anything yet, Ian Purkis is already reacting to a threat that hasn't fully revealed itself. His survival instinct is clearly operating on a level that the Academy never taught him. Syria Yerdina's expression instantly shifts to shock as the realization of their situation finally hits her like a physical blow. Above them, the dark silhouettes of the trees begin to glow with a dozen pairs of menacing, violet eyes. The shadow wolves have perfectly transitioned from stalkers to predators, looming over Ian Purkis and Syria Yerdina from the high branches. They're trapped in a kill zone, and the first strike is coming from the one place they weren't looking. A jagged purple warning flashes across a dark void, screaming that every student in the forest is now in mortal danger. Ian Purkis reads through a series of letters that explain how the scars of the last war are still very much alive and threatening the Empire. These messages emphasize that he needs to stay alert because the peace everyone currently enjoys is extremely fragile. He's the only one who knows the hunting festival is about to turn into a literal graveyard. Ian Purkis and Syria Yerdina stand side by side in their full academy gear, looking like a literal power couple of destruction. Down on the forest floor, orange sound effects erupt as the two of them start sprinting through the dense thicket of leaves. They aren't trying to be heroes right now, they are making a tactical retreat to avoid a direct confrontation. The calm of the festival has been completely replaced by the chaotic sound of a desperate dash. Ian Purkis looks over his shoulder and firmly states that they are running away because fighting these things head-on is a suicide mission. He explains that the smartest move is to find a professor and get the academy staff involved before students start dropping like flies. He checks in on Syria Yerdina one last time to make sure she's mentally prepared for the sprint of her life. He's playing it smart, which is exactly why he's survived this long. Syria Yerdina manages a quick, alright, as she prepares to push her physical limits to keep up with Ian Purkis. Ian Purkis shouts out a determined, yes, as he sees an opening in the trees and guns it for the clearing. Their red and white capes flutter violently behind them as they tear through the forest at breakneck speeds. They are moving so fast the background is starting to blur into a mess of brown and green. The woods are filled with the heavy, rhythmic thudding of boots against the dirt as the two trainees push deeper into the foliage. A dramatic title card appears, signaling that the real battle for survival has officially begun for Ian Purkis. Everything is escalating at a terrifying rate, and the forest feels like it's actively trying to swallow them whole. It's a high-stakes race where the finish line is the only place they'll be safe. A massive shadow wolf bursts through the brush, its paws leaving trails of dark purple aura as it hunts them down. Syria Yerdina realizes with a shock that the monster is actually chasing them and isn't planning on letting its meal walk away. Ian Purkis keeps his eyes forward, calculating that if they can just maintain this distance, they might actually make it out of the kill zone. The creature's glowing eyes stay fixed on their backs, proving that escaping a shadow wolf is easier said than done. Ian Purkis and Syria Yerdina are pushing their limits through the dense undergrowth when a high-pitched, curdling scream shatters the forest's silence. The sound is raw and desperate, signaling that the first victims of the shadow wolf ambush have already been found and cornered. In the middle of this sudden chaos, Syria Yerdina's foot catches a jagged root, sending her crashing into the dirt with a sharp, muffled groan. She clenches her teeth in agony, her elite academy composure finally breaking under the sudden physical toll of the fall. Ian Purkis stops dead in his tracks, spinning around to find Syria Yerdina clutching her leg while struggling to get back up. She admits that she's twisted the same ankle she previously injured during training, which makes it impossible for her to maintain their escape pace. Realizing the life-or-death stakes, she urgently tells Ian Purkis to keep running and leave her to face the wolves alone. She is essentially offering herself up as a sacrifice so he can survive, showing just how dire she thinks their situation has become. Ian Purkis silently calculates the timing in his head, knowing the shadow wolves are covering ground much faster than any natural predator should. The tactical lead he worked so hard to maintain has vanished, and the distance between them and the pack is shrinking by the second. Syria Yerdina watches him with a look of pure dread, her face etched with the grim certainty that they have completely run out of time. At this rate, the forest floor is going to be painted red before any reinforcements can even track their location. Ian Purkis looks down at her with a chillingly calm expression and tells Syria Yerdina to just get herself to safety once she finds the strength to move. Syria Yerdina looks completely blindsided by his cold focus, her eyes wide with the crushing weight of her own perceived failure. She starts stammering that this entire disaster is her fault and that her weakness is about to get them both slaughtered. It is a heavy, emotional moment of self-blame, but Ian Purkis has already moved far past the point of debating who is responsible. Ian Purkis turns his back to her, his signature red cape billowing in the wind as he stares into the dark, vibrating heart of the woods. He stands there like a literal fortress wall, positioned firmly between Syria Yerdina and the supernatural monsters lurking in the thick brush. Before she can even find the words to argue, he launches himself forward, disappearing into the trees with a sudden burst of terrifying, kinetic speed. He is not fleeing the scene to save his own skin, he is taking the fight directly to the pack to buy her every possible second. Ian Purkis tears through the forest with absolute lethal intent, his body becoming a sharp blur of motion as he hunts the hunters. The local wildlife has completely vanished from the area, driven into deep hiding by the overwhelming, predatory aura of the beasts closing in. Ian Purkis does not care about the impossible odds or the fact that these wolves possess magical hides designed to repel standard academy blades. He is moving with the single-minded focus of a professional executioner, ready to validate his madman reputation by turning this ambush into a total bloodbath. Dark shadows sweep across the forest floor as Ian Purkis evaluates the tactical disadvantage of a frontal assault against the supernatural pack closing in. He shifts his weight and plants his feet firmly, deciding that charging in blindly is a certain death sentence against the overwhelming, magical hides of the shadow wolves. It's a calculated pivot that turns the entire terrain into his personal slaughterhouse to ensure the wounded trainees stand even a slight chance of surviving this nightmare. Ian Purkis pulls out a glowing blue vial provided by Emma and downs the contents in one jagged, desperate gulp to force his mana to the surface. The empty glass container shatters against the dark earth as he grimaces at the foul, metallic aftertaste of the potent chemical stimulant running through his veins. This drug is clearly a dangerous gamble that puts an immense strain on his heart, but he doesn't have the luxury of being picky when death is literally howling at his heels. A violent surge of blue mana erupts from his core, swirling around his legs and arms like a localized electrical storm of pure, unbridled power. Ian Purkis clenches his white-gloved fist, feeling the artificial energy heighten his physical limits to a terrifying degree that most ordinary soldiers could never hope to withstand. He finally possesses the raw kinetic output needed to bypass the magical defenses of those supernatural wolf hides with a single, devastating strike from his executioner's edge. Ian Purkis grabs handfuls of damp forest leaves and begins crushing the green pulp against his uniform to mask his human scent from the approaching predators. While it won't totally erase his presence from their sensitive noses, he quickly draws his blade to clear his line of sight and locate the perfect hiding spot within the thicket. He is prepping the kill zone with the methodical chill of a seasoned hunter who knows exactly how to exploit an enemy's instinctual blind spots. Ian Purkis leaps high into the forest canopy with unnatural speed, perching on a thick branch like a silent bird of prey while scanning the clearing for his first target. His golden eyes flare with an intense, predatory light as he waits for the first sign of purple mana to emerge from the shifting, dark undergrowth below his feet. He is effectively setting himself up as the ultimate wild card in this massacre, just waiting for the perfect, bloody moment to drop down and start the culling. The woods fall into a heavy, suffocating silence as the madman prepares to strike from his elevated position high within the dark, rustling branches. Suddenly, a massive, clawed paw wreathed in crackling dark purple energy slams into the dirt with the crushing weight of a falling boulder near the wounded trainees. The first shadow wolf has officially stepped into the trap, its glowing eyes hunting for a meal while the very man it's looking for watches its every move from the shadows above. The shadow wolf fully emerges from the gloom, its ashen fur matted and thick while crackling purple energy arcs off its body like jagged lightning. Ian Purkis watches from his vantage point, tracking the way the creature's black eyes scan the area for more easy prey among the wounded trainees. This thing is an absolute unit, standing taller than any adult man and exhaling a visible mist of pure, concentrated magic. Ian recognizes the threat immediately, confirming that this isn't just a monster, but the specific demon beast from his dark premonitions. Below him, the massive beast stops in its tracks, sniffing the air with a look of genuine confusion as if the trail has suddenly gone cold. Ian Purkis is perched high on a sturdy oak branch, his red cape fluttering slightly in the wind while he keeps his center of gravity perfectly balanced. He looks down with a predatory gaze of his own, completely unfazed by the killing machine pacing just a few yards beneath his boots. The beast is looking for a fight on the ground, but Ian is playing a much higher stakes game from the canopy. As the shadow wolf's massive, clawed paw presses into the dirt, a sudden streak of white and red cuts through the dark forest air. Ian Purkis kicks off the branch with explosive power, diving headfirst toward the monster with zero hesitation. His red cape billows out behind him, catching the light and making him look like a falling star of vengeance. The sheer speed of his descent is terrifying, turning the gravity of the fall into a weapon that the wolf hasn't even noticed yet. Mid-air, Ian Purkis's golden eyes burn with a focused light as he grits his teeth, bracing his entire body for the impact. He reaches out with a steady hand, his tactical gloves ready to guide the coming strike directly into the beast's thick hide. The shadow wolf's head snaps upward at the last possible second, its purple eyes dilating in a moment of pure, animalistic terror. It finally understands that it isn't the one doing the hunting anymore, but the window for a counterattack has already slammed shut. Ian Purkis brings his hands together on his weapon, focusing every bit of his internal energy into the downward plunge. He slams into the shadow wolf's head with a deafening roar of power, causing a violent eruption of red and orange flames to swallow the immediate area. A massive, vertical pillar of light tears through the creature's skull, anchoring it to the forest floor in a display of absolute dominance. The wolf doesn't even have time to whimper before the raw kinetic force of Ian's arrival ends the fight instantly. Ian Purkis feels the jarring shock of his blade vibrating against the shadow wolf's hide, realizing instantly that his standard aura isn't dense enough to pierce the creature's supernatural defense. He immediately abandons his refined academy form, shifting his entire center of gravity to pour every ounce of his physical weight into a crushing downward thrust. His face contorts with a savage intensity as he grits his teeth, focusing all his kinetic energy into the strike to compensate for the lack of magical penetration. He lets out a primal roar, commanding the beast to drop dead as he forces the heavy weapon through the monster's reinforced skull. A massive shockwave of white and purple energy erupts from the point of impact, signaling that Ian Purkis has finally broken through the beast's thick hide. The sheer mechanical force of the blow drives the shadow wolf's head directly into the dirt, shattering the ground beneath it with a deafening crack. It's a brutal, unrefined display of power that leaves the predator silenced and crushed under the weight of Ian's desperate gamble. The creature doesn't even have the chance to let out a final whimper before its life is snuffed out by the overwhelming pressure. Ian Purkis stands over the massive, unmoving carcass, his chest heaving as he mentally calculates the immense toll that a single kill has taken on his stamina. He looks down at his hands, acknowledging the chilling reality that taking out just one of these monsters required his absolute maximum effort. The red fabric of his cape flutters in the unsettling silence of the woods as he realizes he is standing in a literal graveyard of his own making. He stares into the dense foliage, estimating the overwhelming number of predators that are still lurking in the shadows, waiting for their turn to strike. Ian Purkis retreats into the thick, rustling bushes, his sharp golden eyes scanning the tree-line with a mask of cold, calculated focus. He understands that if even one of these demonic wolves manages to slip past his position, Syria Yerdina will be in immediate and lethal danger. His expression remains grim as he accepts the burden of acting as the sole guardian for the remaining students, knowing that his madman reputation is the only thing keeping the pack's attention on him. He remains perfectly still, blending into the greenery while he prepares for the inevitable wave of coordinated violence heading his way. The forest is bathed in the ominous orange glow of the setting sun, turning the gaps between the trees into dark, inviting maws for the approaching pack. A heavy, clawed paw treads softly through the undergrowth, marking the arrival of more shadow wolves who are instinctively drawn to the scent of their fallen kin. Ian Purkis watches with an eerie, predatory glow in his own eyes, noting that these demonic beasts move with the terrifying efficiency of a hive mind. They are currently fanning out through the darkening woods, systematically searching for the human who dared to break their line, and the hunt is only just beginning. Ian Purkis scans the dark, shifting silhouettes of the dense foliage, sensing the oppressive weight of 5 separate shadow wolves stalking him from the brush. He refuses to play the role of the victim and explodes into motion, burying his heavy weapon into the lead beast with enough bone-shattering force to liquefy its internal organs. A violent, massive fountain of dark gore sprays across the clearing as the wolf's supernatural defense is completely bypassed by the sheer kinetic energy of the strike. It is becoming very clear right now that Ian Purkis is the only true apex predator in these woods. The sharp, glowing edge of Ian Purkis's blade carves a deep, jagged ruin through another wolf's flank, sending a spray of hot crimson across the dirt. He pivots his entire frame with the momentum of his heavy red cape, bringing the metal edge down in a wide, punishing arc that catches a third leaping wolf midair. The air grows thick with the metallic scent of fresh blood as he moves with a brutal, efficient rhythm that completely ignores the refined elegance of academy swordsmanship. He has essentially turned this section of the forest into a personal slaughterhouse in less than a minute. A wild, almost manic grin splits Ian Purkis's face as the raw adrenaline of the life-or-death struggle takes full control of his senses. This high-octane moment is suddenly interrupted when a wolf's razor-sharp claw tears through his side, forcing a sharp, guttural grunt of pain from his lungs. He forces himself to swallow the searing agony and endure the strike, knowing that any hesitation will result in him being torn to shreds by the pack. This is a terrifying look at just how far Ian Purkis is willing to push his own body to secure a win. Ian Purkis stays eerily silent, realizing that letting out even a single scream of pain will signal the rest of the prowling pack to swarm his location. Another deep, jagged gash opens up across his skin, spilling fresh blood that begins to stain his gray academy uniform a deep, morbid crimson. He ignores the damage and maintains his focus, his golden eyes tracking the next target even as his own strength begins to leak onto the forest floor. He is playing an incredibly dangerous game of chicken with his own mortality, and he doesn't look like he's ready to blink. The ground shakes with a heavy, wet thud as Ian Purkis slams his weight into a lunging beast, pinning the monster momentarily against the roots of a tree. He readjusts his white-gloved grip on his weapon, his knuckles turning ivory as he channels every ounce of his remaining aura into the cold metal. A brilliant vertical beam of light begins to crackle along the length of the blade, signaling a final, decisive strike meant to end this ambush once and for all. He isn't just fighting for survival anymore, he is looking to physically delete anything standing in his path. Ian Purkis brings his blade down in a blinding flash of energy that cleaves through the final beast and the earth itself in one fluid, devastating motion. He stands motionless amidst the cooling carcasses as the sun finally dips below the horizon, casting a long, blood-red shadow across the mangled remains of the pack. The silence that follows is heavy and suffocating, broken only by the sound of his own ragged, exhausted breathing. He is a bloody, battered mess, but he is the only one walking away from this massacre alive. Ian Purkis gazes down at the heavy executioner's axe, the broad blade coated in the thick, dark ichor of the monsters he just butchered. He realizes that this crude, heavy tool is far more effective at shattering the supernatural hides of the shadow wolves than any refined academy rapier could ever hope to be. Standing tall amidst the mangled remains of the pack, his signature red cape billows in the wind as a ghostly blue aura begins to radiate from his body. He looks less like a trainee and more like a seasoned butcher who has finally found his rhythm in the middle of a slaughterhouse. Ian rests his blood-stained white glove against his belt, feeling the strange, cold energy of the entity within him pulsing through his veins. He acknowledges that while the source of this power might be sinister, it's the only thing keeping him standing in the face of such overwhelming odds. His golden eyes glow with a sharp, predatory light as he looks up toward the canopy, his focus narrowing onto the remaining threats hiding in the dark. In this heightened state of combat trance, he feels as though he could dismantle any number of these beasts with nothing but raw, kinetic force. A jagged, blood-red scream tears through the heavy atmosphere of the forest, signaling that the panic among the other students has reached a breaking point. Nearby, a female student is having a complete emotional collapse, her face twisted in a bizarre combination of terror and pure, unadulterated jealousy. She is screaming at the top of her lungs, furious that Ian Purkis would choose to protect Syria Yerdina instead of staying by her side. It is almost surreal how she is more concerned about Ian's social choices than the literal monsters currently hunting them down. The girl continues her high-pitched tirade, convinced that Ian and Syria Yerdina are currently off on some romantic escapade while the rest of the academy fights for their lives. Her delusions are interrupted as the regrouped students start shouting for Professor Derek, the chaos finally reaching the ears of the faculty members. The atmosphere shifts from confusion to high alert as the instructors realize the formation has been completely compromised and students are missing. The sheer volume of the screaming makes it impossible for the adults to ignore the fact that the madman and the prodigy are nowhere to be found. Syria Yerdina finally emerges from the thick brush, her silver hair matted and her posture suggesting she's barely holding herself together after the brutal ambush. She finds Professor Derek and the other survivors, her voice coming out in ragged bursts as she tries to explain the nightmare unfolding behind her. She tells them that the pack of shadow wolves was far larger than anyone anticipated and that they were nearly overwhelmed in the first few seconds. The most devastating part of her confession is that Ian Purkis is currently standing his ground alone to ensure the others have a chance to regroup. Professor Derek nods, acknowledging the severity of the situation while commanding the other traumatized students to stay back and wait for backup. Syria Yerdina isn't interested in waiting, her eyes flashing with a fierce, silver light as she prepares to dive back into the chaos. She shouts a desperate promise to save Ian Purkis, her voice ringing out like a battle cry as she leaves the safety of the group behind. With a sudden burst of speed, she disappears into the dark foliage, determined to reach Ian before the shadow wolves can finish their meal. Ian Purkis is hunched over on the forest floor, his face twisted in a mask of pure, agonizing strain as he fights to stay conscious. He is pushing himself past the physical limits of a human body, his golden eyes locked onto the predators circling in the shadows. His legs tremble violently as he forces himself to stand, his knees nearly buckling under the immense pressure of the surrounding aura. The ground beneath him is slick with the blood of his fallen classmates, making every single movement a life-or-death gamble. Syria Yerdina lies motionless in the dirt, her shimmering silver hair matted with grime and forest debris. She weakly whispers for Ian Purkis, her voice barely a hollow breath as her eyes begin to lose their luster. A sudden, blinding white flash consumes the vision, carrying a desperate mental plea for Ian Purkis to stay safe amidst the carnage. It feels like a final, tragic goodbye being sent through the void before the darkness takes her completely. A weathered journal page appears, revealing the gruesome details of a student named Emma who was the first to be butchered by these beasts. The text describes her being found with her stomach ripped open, a horrific warning that Ian Purkis realizes he should have decoded much sooner. A vision of Ian Purkis and Syria Yerdina standing in their full combat gear follows, representing the peak power they must reach to survive this trap. They look like gods of war, yet the reality of the forest is far more desperate and bloody. A shadow wolf is suddenly caught in a mid-air transition, a massive spray of blood erupting from its side as a blade shears through its hide. Ian Purkis has stopped retreating and is now carving a path of destruction through the pack with frantic, heavy swings. Another wolf snarls, its snout dripping with saliva and malice as it prepares to lunge at his throat. These monsters are relentless, driven by a supernatural hunger that doesn't recognize fear or pain. Ian Purkis delivers a devastating, overhead strike that shatters the ribcage of a lunging shadow wolf, sending a fountain of gore across the trees. He is moving like a man possessed, his academy uniform soaked in the dark fluids of the monsters he is systematically dismantling. He stands firm among the bodies of the slain, his sword glowing with a lethal light as he stares down the remaining predators. His expression is cold and hollow, proving that the madman persona wasn't just an act, it was a survival mechanism. A final, bone-chilling howl rips through the dark canopy as fresh droplets of blood splatter across the frame. The shadow wolves are calling for reinforcements, their jagged tails twitching in anticipation of a second, even more violent wave. This isn't the end of the massacre, it's merely the conclusion of the opening act. The forest is hungry, and the true nightmare is only just beginning for Ian Purkis and his remaining allies. Shadowy paws slam into the dirt as Ian Purkis realizes he is in deep trouble. A massive wolf with a glowing purple aura snarls, signaling the rest of the pack to move in for the kill. Another beast leaps from the high ground, its fangs bared for a lethal strike. These things are moving way too fast for a normal human to track. Ian Purkis slides under a lunging wolf, his red cape fluttering through the dust. He looks up with blood-stained cheeks and gold eyes that look absolutely lethal in the dim light. Sparks fly as he draws his steel, the blade vibrating with mana as he prepares to counter. He is basically inviting the entire pack to an absolute bloodbath. A blur of purple energy slashes across the air as the wolves coordinate their next assault. Ian Purkis realizes these magical beasts move with a speed that defies physics. He stands centered among the circling predators, his uniform tattered and soaked in gore. Taking on the whole pack at once is quickly turning into a total nightmare. Ian Purkis glares forward with his glowing gold eyes while fresh blood drips down his chin. He decides that if this meager level of intensity is all the pack has to offer, he's definitely going to survive. He tightens his blood-slicked grip on his blade and prepares for a high-risk mana surge. A massive burst of blue energy erupts across the clearing as Ian Purkis finally stops holding back. Two shadow wolves are caught in a massive X of white-hot energy that tears right through their supernatural hides. Ian Purkis lunges through the resulting smoke, his tattered red cape trailing behind him like a streak of fire. He becomes a literal blur of motion as he navigates the jagged terrain of the forest. He's moving so fast now that the beasts can't even track his physical position. Dozens of blue slashes cut through the darkness, turning the trees into a meat grinder for the remaining pack. Ian Purkis eventually comes to a halt, standing as a dark silhouette over the mangled remains of a predator. His luminous gold eyes pierce through the gloom as he demands the rest of the shadow wolves show themselves. The hunter has officially become the apex predator in this forest. Ian Purkis promises to personally eliminate every single creature remaining in the shadows. He isn't just fighting for his life anymore, he's on a warpath to clear the entire festival grounds. The scene fades as the autumn leaves settle into an eerie, temporary silence. This is only the beginning of his absolute massacre. Ian Purkis stands amidst the carnage, his heavy breathing the only sound in a silent clearing. He remains on high alert, his sword held low as blood drips from his tattered red cape onto the dirt. The weight of the battle is clearly starting to settle in. Ian Purkis grips his hilt tighter, realizing he hasn't actually cleared the area of magical beasts yet. Two glowing purple eyes emerge from the thick brush, staring him down with a cold, unnatural intensity. The beast just sits there, refusing to close the distance or engage. This monster actually has patience, which is a massive red flag. Ian Purkis observes the predator lurking within a stone crater and immediately suspects it's trying to lure him into a trap. He readies himself to end it, but his instincts flare as a familiar scent hits him. He stops dead in his tracks, sniffing the air as the orange sunset begins to fade into a dangerous twilight. This isn't just a beast hunt anymore. He's smelling something that definitely doesn't belong in these woods. Ian stands completely frozen, blood splattered across his face as a sudden, sickening realization hits him like a physical blow. He catches a familiar, sharp scent on the wind and immediately curses his luck, recognizing a smell he could never forget. Tightening his grip on both his blade and axe, he stands his ground as the forest settles into a dangerous, blood-red twilight. This has officially stopped being a simple hunt and turned into a hunt for vengeance. Crouching near a mangled beast's hoof, Ian identifies the distinct chemical tang of a potion from Emma's workshop. His golden eyes widen in shock for a split second before settling into a gaze of cold, murderous intent. His hand tremors with a surge of adrenaline and raw fury as he grits his teeth against the rising tension. The pieces of the puzzle are finally fitting together, and Ian looks ready to snap. A monstrous shadow wolf towers over him, its massive jaws dripping with a thick, purple supernatural aura. Ian glares up at the beast, realizing this is the exact creature that attacked Emma. The wolf lets out a bone-chilling snarl, its glowing eyes and massive fangs filling the frame as it prepares to finish what it started. Ian stares directly into the monster's throat, certain of its identity and ready to spill its blood. Ian's golden eye flares with a predatory light as fresh blood drips down his pale cheek. He stares the monster down and coldly declares that its life ends right here in the dirt. The shadow wolf snarls back, its massive fangs dripping with a toxic, purple supernatural aura. This guy has reached his absolute breaking point and he's definitely taking the wolf down with him. Dark purple energy swirls around the beast's paws against the backdrop of the orange, dying sun. Ian stands his ground with his sword and uniform completely drenched in the dark, wet remains of the pack. He stares at the thick gore on his blade and curses the creature with a low, guttural intensity. He looks absolutely demonic right now, matching the monster's bloodlust beat for beat. The high-ranking beast lunges forward with its glowing eyes fixed directly on Ian's throat. Ian realizes this creature is different because it waited to strike instead of rushing in blindly like the others. It's actually mocking him, laughing at the idea that a bloodied, exhausted human could ever win. This is a lethal game of chess and the wolf just made its opening move to end the match. Ian Purkis's knuckles turn white as he tightens his grip on the hilt, knowing a single mistake will be his last. He decides he has to test the beast's speed before committing to a final, desperate move. A shadow wolf's massive paw shatters the earth where he stood just a second ago, sending jagged debris flying. The predator looms over him with glowing purple eyes, looking less like an animal and more like a living nightmare. Ian barely has time to blink before a blur of purple energy rips through the air, forcing him into a panicked dodge. A heavy impact sends him tumbling across the dirt while fresh blood splatters against the soil. He realizes the creature is moving at a level his exhausted body can't naturally track. He basically saw his life flash before his eyes during that roll. Ian skids to a halt and braces himself against the floor while his mind tries to process the wolf's insane predatory rhythm. Even though his eyes saw the strike coming, his muscles simply weren't fast enough to move his body out of the way in time. The shadow wolf doesn't give him a single second to recover and lunges from above with its claws extended. Ian lets out a guttural roar, channeling his mana into a glowing red blade to meet the beast midair. Ian Purkis unleashes a chaotic flurry of red mana slashes, turning the air into a web of lethal energy. The lead shadow wolf snaps its jaws just inches from his throat, its eyes burning with a supernatural purple light. He manages to deflect the massive predator's weight, causing it to let out a pained, guttural howl that shakes the surrounding trees. Ian's blade finally finds its mark, carving into the beast's thick neck and sending a spray of dark blood across the forest floor. He immediately leaps back to create space, his silhouette framed against the blood-red sunset as he gasps for air. He's already covered in gore, yet his movements remain sharp and calculated despite the overwhelming exhaustion. A massive red arc of mana slams directly into the skull of the nearest shadow wolf with a sickening thud. Ian Purkis glares through the chaos, his golden eyes glowing with a manic intensity as he pushes himself to the absolute limit. He knows one wrong move means death, so he forces his muscles to ignite with every bit of mana he has left. Sparks fly as Ian's sword grinds against the wolf's hide, which feels more like reinforced steel than actual fur. He realizes the durability of these monsters is completely insane, making every single strike a massive drain on his energy. Everything culminates in a violent, swirling vortex of purple and black mana as Ian prepares to unleash a final, desperate explosion of power. Ian swings his blade in a wide red arc, but the shadow wolf responds with an insane mid-air somersault to escape. The beast spins like a purple blur before sticking a perfect landing and surging with dark electricity. These monsters are showing off a level of agility that makes survival look nearly impossible. Blood drips from Ian's mouth as he stares at the shadow wolf's acrobatic display with pure annoyance. He mutters about selling the beast to a circus for its flashy flips before deciding to just beat it half to death instead. Even in a literal death match, his sarcasm is still working overtime. Ian notices the shadow wolf's fangs are cracked from biting his blade, offering a tiny bit of relief against its lethal bite. He remains wary of its claws while acknowledging he's in terrible shape from the opening ambush. His stamina is hitting rock bottom at the worst possible time. A massive black blur streaks toward Ian at a speed his tired eyes can barely track. He realizes he's too exhausted to dodge another high-speed blitz like the last one. A desperate cry escapes him as the sheer force of the incoming impact prepares to end the fight for good. A massive shadow wolf lunges through the air with its claws extended and eyes glowing a sinister purple. Ian Purkis throws himself into a frantic, dirt-spraying roll just as the beast's paw shatters the ground where he stood. He regains his footing with a pained expression, realizing the monster's speed is becoming impossible to track. Ian Purkis swings his blade in a desperate red arc to force the predators back for a split second. He admits to himself that the beast completely outclasses him in both stamina and raw speed. If he doesn't find a way to finish this fight immediately, his body is going to give out before he can land a real hit. The shadow wolf stands its ground, radiating a dark aura as it prepares for the final kill. Ian Purkis realizes he has to end the hunt right now while the beast is still focused on playing with its prey. The monster roars directly in his face, clearly smelling the fresh blood on his uniform. A blood-red warning bubble appears as Ian Purkis makes a final, life-threatening decision. He admits he didn't want to fight this way because of the extreme danger, but he has no other choice left. A violent explosion of white and purple light detonates, consuming the wolf in a pillar of pure mana. A colossal pillar of purple mana detonates in a blinding flash. Ian Purkis is thrown backward by the shockwave, his lungs seizing as he coughs up a thick spray of blood. Crimson droplets hit the soil in a rhythmic drip, signaling he's reached his absolute limit. Honestly, it's a miracle he's even conscious right now. The dust settles to reveal a massive shadow wolf silhouette towering over the boy. Ian Purkis looks up, completely paralyzed as a jagged claw reaches for his throat. A violent splash of red suddenly paints the ground. Things just went from bad to potentially fatal in a heartbeat. The red-stained horizon shows Ian Purkis slumped against a tree while the beast's jaws open wide above him. He doesn't even flinch as the predator prepares for the final strike. Another heavy splatter of gore hits the dirt with a wet thud. The screen fades, leaving the outcome of this massacre buried in the woods. A forgotten letter surfaces, exposing how the Academy administration ignored the warning signs of these attacks. It places the blame squarely on Dean Delmore for pushing the festival forward despite the chaos. Ian Purkis is just a pawn in a much darker game than he realized. The stage is set for a massive reckoning.